thing that I am known for is the UFO job, which is a posting that I had from 1991 through to 1994. Probably the nearest equivalent to the job I was doing, you'd have to go back to the old US Air Force Project Blue Book. If disclosure was easy, we would have done it by now. There must be something that makes this difficult. A secret too terrible to be told. There is a faction that believes that aspects of this phenomenon are demonic. He received what he could only describe as a sort of telepathic download of ones and zeros. He translated it from binary. There was a message, a list of latitudinal and longitudinal coordinates. Our intelligence community imagery analysts looked at them. They said, this object is real.
So you're the reason we're all saying UAP.
I am the reason.
What do you see as coming next? Like what's on the horizon?
I think it's something where I would give people some advice. Buckle up, because we're going on one heck of a ride.
Well, good. Well, welcome, Nick Pope. I'm excited to have you here, man. Excited to start talking today about all the things. There's a lot of things we're going to get into, not just UFOs today, right? So probably focus on UFO, UAP, but then potentially a little bit on COVID. You're writing a book about that. And then potentially a little bit on maybe some ancient Civ stuff. If I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Sure thing. Yeah. Nothing's off limits, and I'm looking forward to this.
Cool. Well, tell us a little bit about first off, maybe what are you doing today? What's life like today for Nick Pope?
Life is busy, which is good. I enjoy working. So obviously today here filming with you, which is great to come to Florida and do that.
It's cold though, man.
Yeah,
it's cold here.
It's like a generational weather event.
It is.
They're saying it's like the time we had snow in Tucson,
right? And
it was on top of the saguaro cacti and things. Right, it was like crazy.
Yeah,
but
10 inches of snow in Tallahassee, Florida. I mean, crazy. We don't see that often.
But last week I was in Los Angeles filming for a TV show. And next week, I'm going back to LA for a different TV show. So and of course, they've got the terrible fires there. So it's like, it's nothing personal. This stuff isn't anything to do with me. It's not following me around or anything. Right. But so I'm busy with that. My new film, COVID Apocalypse, has just been recently released, and I'm doing a few interviews on that as well. And then fairly shortly, the Ancient Aliens Alive stage show will resume after its Christmas and New Year break, and we will be on the road again. I'll be off with Giorgio Tsoukalos, William Henry, and Jason Martell, and we've got 13 shows coming up in different cities around the U.S.
Beautiful. Nice. That's exciting. That'll be great. So the LA stuff, the LA shows that you're doing, are you able to say what that is?
Yeah, the one that I was doing last week is Unbelievable with Dan Aykroyd.
Cool.
So did an interview on a whole bunch of kind of just weird and wonderful stories. Some of them can be mystery orientated. Some of them are just kind of quirky things from history. It's great fun. And next week, my LA trip is going to be Ancient Aliens. We're shooting the new series of that.
Nice. So, what season are they up to?
Oh my goodness. It depends whether you take the listings that IMDb do or the listings that the network do. But I think it's like something like season 17, maybe 19 if you do the other way around. I mean, of course, it started as a one-off special, 2-hour special on history in 2009.
Right.
It's now something like 250 episodes, I think.
Wow.
It's amazing. It is. It's not just a TV show. It's an international phenomenon.
Right.
The secret sauce that makes it a success. Who knows?
Yeah. Right, right. Yeah, I've always been interested in that show, and I watched that show for the first probably, I guess, 4 or 5 seasons, and then lost track of it. But it was always super entertaining. They definitely made you think. I mean, they for sure put out possibilities that were like, oh wow, you know, it makes you think differently. So they do a good job.
Yeah, and the other thing is, it's not one of these preachy shows. It doesn't say you must think this, and it starts a lot of the points with what if, or, you know, is it possible? And that's the point. You know, let's kickstart a conversation about this. I know you've spoken to people like Graham Hancock and Billy Carson, many of, you know, the people who believe that maybe there may be things in our past that the official histories don't necessarily tell. So yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. Yeah, I've had a lot of great guests on from the ancient civilization community, and it's just been amazing to explore some of those possibilities. There's some, you know, we were talking about Baalbek earlier before we started recording, and I mean, just as one example of just an infinite amount of mysteries that are all over the world that have the potential to rewrite the way that we understand our history.
Yes, I think we keep pushing the timeline further and further back.
Yeah.
I mean, when I was growing up, it was like, well, you know, pretty much the first civilization was the Sumerians. And really before that, it was just a whole bunch of people in animal skins, you know, hunting mammoths, that sort of thing. And now, of course, we have Göbekli Tepe and some of the other sites in modern day Turkey,
right,
pushing that timeline back to you know, civilizations capable of working together to construct these sites. And people forget, it's not just the monuments and the sites, but to work on a collaborative venture like that requires organizational planning that says something about human thought. You almost certainly need a written language to communicate ideas,
yep,
to put down your plans, your construction plans, your blueprints. So again, what else is out there? Because
yep,
I guarantee if we're having this discussion again in 10 years' time, we'll be talking about a site 15,000, 20,000
right,
years in the past.
Right, right. Yeah, it's a crazy site. And they're actually finding a lot of stone artifacts, not too dissimilar from some of these that we have in here from you know, Egypt, but they're finding them in Tez-Teplar, not Göbekli Tepe specifically, but I think Karahan Tepe. They found a lot of the stone plates and bowls, and again, made from some of the hardest stones on the planet. And it's just a huge mystery as to how they were able to cut those rocks and shape them so well.
Yeah, I was having this conversation with David Childress and Giorgio Tsoukalos about Sacsayhuaman and Pumapunku and things, and getting into the fact that the rocks there, you know, and the Olmec heads, for example, I mean, the rocks used, the stones that are cut with precision, tend to be things like grey andesite and basalt, which on the Mohs scale of hardness are like 8, 9.
Yep.
And then they're trying to tell us that these were cut with copper tools that they found there. That just does not work.
Yeah, it doesn't. It for sure doesn't work for the precision artifacts. Now, I mean, with enough time and enough labor, you could use a dolerite or a hematite or something like that to shape a lot of these hard stones. But when it gets to the precision artifacts, the ones that are very, very much symmetrical, very round down to a few thousandths of an inch, that whole method it doesn't work. So, you know, they're either modern reproductions, or there is something extraordinary about our history that we don't know what tools people were really using back in prehistory.
I would go with the latter.
Yeah.
And I mean, again, looking at some of the massive stone blocks, like the platform at Baalbek in Lebanon, to figure out that. And I was having this conversation with Travis Taylor, and he was saying that to lift something like that, and it's not, as you know, it's not Roman. The Romans kind of inherited it from the Sumerians,
right, for sure,
built on top of it.
Yep.
But you would have to build a special crane, specially constructed to to hoist something like that,
Right,
and you'd
right.
have to design it and things, and
Right.
and yet people are saying, oh yeah, it was just done with rollers
Sure,
and hoists and things. It's like,
right.
come on, man.
Yeah. No. It's what we have, so it must have been what they used. It's what we know about, so it must have been what they used. It's a silly argument. Well, good. Well, how did you get into the? I guess first off, where did you grow up? Where are you from?
I'm from England, and as you can
a great
probably
accent.
tell from my funny accent.
It's fantastic.
Well, as TV producers say that an English accent is a superpower.
It is, yeah. Makes you appear 10 times smarter than anyone else in the room.
Yeah,
so,
I'm not, of course, but my accent means I can get away with it.
Right.
And people think, oh, he must know a lot.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, just bluffing it.
Yeah, perfect.
But no, I was brought up in the UK and lived there until I was about 45, and then actually got married to US citizen and moved over. I've been in the US since January 2012, but brought up in England, and the Ministry of Defence, the MOD, was what I jokingly call the family firm, because my father worked there as a government scientist, actually an aeronautical engineer, but he went on to be director of the Royal Aeronautical Establishment at Farnborough, where they have the air shows, and actually retired as Deputy Chief Scientific Advisor to the Ministry of Defence. And he'd always encouraged me, he'd said it's working for your country is something to be proud of, and it's something interesting, and you'll go home every day and you'll have worked on things that you'll see on the news, and then he said you'll be working on other things which you'll never see in the news. And
Okay.
and he gave me a sort of knowing smile, and I was like, well, this really does sound intriguing. So I did join, and I was there for 21 years. And for those people watching who don't know what the MOD is, it is the equivalent of the DOD here in the States. So it's a policy-making government department, but it also, in a dual-hatted way, serves as the UK's highest-level military headquarters. Now, I was a civilian employee, and one of the great things that attracted me about a career in the MOD is that every 3 or 4 years, either on level transfer or promotion, you get to do a different job, a completely different job. So my first posting was, it kind of sounds like bizarre, but I had responsibility for working with the oil and gas industry and the Royal Navy to deconflict their operations in UK territorial waters. I mean, obviously we do a lot of sailing, Navy, and sometimes live firing, and that and oil rigs don't mix very well. So it was just a liaison job, making sure everyone knew at every given moment who was doing what, where. And, it was a sort of fairly routine administrative job, but you knew that it was one where you could not make mistakes. Mistakes would have consequences. And I like that. I like being challenged like that. So that was my first job. Then I had a job that had to do with recruiting into the Air Force. And I got involved in, for example, the debate, which is quite timely here in the US, about whether women would be allowed to fly fast jets, combat missions, things like that. At the time, they were not, and then they were. So I was involved in that policy review and then that policy change. Did a whole bunch of different things. I did some jobs that had to do with, one of the most interesting ones was the last one I had, where it was to do with military policing and counterterrorism. And I got to go on brief trips to places like Kosovo and Iraq. that was very interesting. But of course, the thing that I am known for is the UFO job, which is a posting that I had from 1991 through to 1994.
But you kept working there after that posting?
Yes.
Yeah.
Immediately afterwards, I had a job relating to financial policy, and that was policy when defense does things that are not core defense tasks. So, for example, where does something like counter-narcotics fit in that? Or even working with the film and TV industry. I literally sat in a room, for example, with Barbara Broccoli, and we discussed her wanting to use a Royal Navy ship in the movie Tomorrow Never Dies. And I was like, well, how is the Navy going to be portrayed in this? What's going to happen to the ship? And she said, well, it's going to sink. And I'm like, well, not for real, but in the movie.
Right.
And I'm like, well, how is this good publicity?
Right.
And she's like, well, they all go down fighting and very brave and things. And yeah, anyway,
right.
Slightly off topic, but just to give you an insight into all the different things that you can do in a career in the Ministry of Defense. And it's one moment you're doing finance, the next you're doing counterterrorism, the next you're doing recruitment. And I liked that.
Did you feel like they were testing you early on in your career in order to see if you were going to be ready for the UFO job?
I'm not sure I would characterize it like that, but I would say that from day one, I was absolutely being tested. And I joined for a while what was called MIDIT, which stood for, let me think what it did stand for. Method of identifying and developing and method of identifying and developing internal talent. And it was a kind of fast stream. There were several fast streams. Some were not as fast as others, but I went into this thing called MIDIT. So yes, they do try to identify people who they hope will be high flyers, invest in them in terms of giving them, good training opportunities, but also posting people to challenging areas where you will, for example, have responsibility at a younger age than most. For example, whether that responsibility is managing a team or whether it's managing a particular area of the department's business, or both. And so I was challenged. And again, you're a CEO. You know the value of identifying and then developing your internal talent. So I think people are at their best when they're pushed. And when I became a manager myself, as I rose up the chain, I was always a believer that people worked best under pressure, when you challenge them, and that sometimes if you've got someone who I don't know, there are two ways that their career goes. Take a chance on them, promote them, and I did that a couple of times. I found people who I was lucky enough to work with some brilliant people, some of whom had been sort of languishing at a lower grade. And I thought, here's someone who's just not, they're not on the face of it necessarily doing as well. Why not? Because they're not being challenged. Bring them up a grade or two. And I worked with some amazing people who had that situation, and I was challenged like that very early. Now, I don't think that was necessarily a prerequisite for the UFO job, but it certainly came in handy.
Yeah, gotcha. And you were in that UFO job for 3 or 4 years, you said? 3 years. Yeah. Is that about what you expected going into it, that you would be in there for about that period of time?
It is almost exactly what I expected.
Okay.
At the time, 3 years was pretty much average.
Okay.
And I was in the junior managerial grade. And by that time, I was hoping to get to the next grade up. And I thought, if I do 3 years here and I do well, I will be in the running for a promotion to the grade of what we called HEO, Higher Executive Officer. And that's exactly what happened. So it was pretty much on track.
Okay. So in the Ministry of Defense in the UK, that would be the same thing in the United States as the Department of Defense. And this program that you were the head of would be equivalent to what, like ATIP, or like what would it be?
It's difficult to say because there are similarities in terms of, obviously, we were the subject matter experts on UAP. There were differences, though. We were a public-facing program, and obviously a lot of the work we did was unclassified because, to quote Avi Loeb, you can't classify the skies. And so most of our reports of UAP came in from the public. So actually, to answer your question, probably the nearest equivalent to the job I was doing, you'd have to go back to the old US Air Force Project Blue Book. Now, we did also, in parallel, do some classified work. So that's why I say there are some similarities. And of course, I've met people like Jay Stratton, who headed up the UAP task force when that was a thing prior to Arrow. And I've met people like Lou Elizondo, of course, who had that investigative and policy role in relation to UAP sitting in the Pentagon. So, yeah, the similarities and differences.
Okay, so it was public facing. So it was primarily declassified. You were able to speak about this publicly?
Yes, I can. And that's a question people often say, well, am I a whistleblower? And I'm like, no, absolutely not. I can talk about things that are unclassified and things that have been declassified. So I'm absolutely not a whistleblower and would never discuss any classified information without lawful authority. So we got 200 or 300 UFO reports each year. And of course, UFO is the language that we use to the public. UAP is what we said internally. There's an interesting story about that.
Even back then, you were saying...
We were saying UAP.
UAP, really?
Now, the history, the term UAP, I think some researcher turned up a US document going back to 1948 that used the phrase, but it fell out of use. We resurrected it in the early 90s in the UK Ministry of Defense, and we resurrected it very deliberately and purposefully to rebrand the subject. And we did this because the subject had attracted so much pop culture baggage that we couldn't get it treated seriously.
The stigma.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not saying with the public. I'm saying internally, because we treated this rightly as a defense, national security, and safety of flight issue. But we often struggled, even with our own command structure, to get the resources because people would just say, oh, UFOs. So I sat down with my opposite number, and we deliberately planned a rebranding so that, because to give you an example, if you wanted to go and brief SecDef and say, I'd like 20 minutes of SecDef's time to talk about UAP, you'll maybe get a meeting. If prior to the rebranding, if you'd say, I'd like to go and talk to SecDef about UFOs, it would be, I'm sorry, his schedule's full at the moment. So we used UAP. Then what happened was that in about 2011, so after I had left the Ministry of Defense and I was just doing freelance work, I got a call asking me to come over to Washington, D.C., and I sat in a room with some fairly influential people, including a former chief of staff of a former president of the United States, a former CIA director. I'm not going to name the names, but you and listeners can probably figure out who those individuals might have been, because they have commented on this topic. And I briefed them on history of the UK government's program, some of the flagship cases like Rendlesham Forest and the Calvine Incident. And then I briefed them on the rebranding of UFO to UAP. And that was the thing that they were most interested in. And then fast forward to 2016, I'm watching TV. It's the presidential campaign, Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton is doing an interview on, I think, Jimmy Kimmel. And he asks her about UFOs. And she interrupts and says, no, it's not UFOs, it's UAP. And I thought, hey, wait a minute, that's what happened. That's what that meeting was about, or at least part of it. And sure enough, when somebody asked a U.S. Navy spokesperson about all this, once the story of ATIP and the U.S. Navy videos was in the public domain, courtesy of the New York Times in December 2017, they said, where did you get the term UAP? And the spokesperson for the U.S. Navy, who was handling this at the time, U.S. Navy spokesperson said, it's a term we borrowed from the Brits.
Okay.
And I thought, yeah, and I know which Brit you mean.
Brit, right. So you're the reason we're all saying UAP.
I am the reason. I don't claim, like I say, I did not invent it, but myself and an unnamed opposite number in defense intelligence, we between us resurrected it, and that through my work with some of these people led to this kind of being the way that this was rolled out in the US.
Yep. Do you think it's been helpful to make the change?
Very much so.
Yeah.
There is unprecedented congressional engagement.
For sure.
One of the great things is in this divided world and nation, how bipartisan the support for UAP is. I mean, can people imagine any other subject where you would have AOC sitting next to Tim Burchett talking about how we need to hold government to account and figure out what we're dealing with here? And so, yeah, you've got Democrats like Kirsten Gillibrand, Republicans like Marco Rubio. It's great.
I saw Marco Rubio at a football game, the Gators football game, actually about a month and a half ago, and I congratulated him for the job he's doing on the UAP topic, and he was very appreciative and said that there's a lot more to come. So, yeah, it's great to see everybody kind of coming together on the topic, but you've got some guys, you've got like the Turners, right, or Mike Turner and Mike Rogers, I guess, right, who are they're in tight with Lockheed, I guess, and are kind
I've heard this. There is a narrative going around that, you know, a small group of high-profile Republicans has blocked some of this. That is not entirely a narrative I agree with. Firstly, they didn't block disclosure, which is the narrative coming from some parts of the UFO community. They blocked the Schumer-Rounds amendment, which was to have gone into the current National Defense Authorization Act, and it did have multiple UAP-related provisions. But one of the reasons that was blocked is it's not necessarily that these people are in tight with Lockheed and Lockheed are gatekeepers for this. I don't know whether that's true or not. One of the reasons they there was opposition to this was that there was, for example, a principle of eminent domain written into this, and it said that if any of this technology is in the private sector, government is then mandated to come and take it back. And the UFO community were kind of supporting this, like it was a good thing. And a few people were saying, well, wait a minute, it sounds like a good thing, but really it's a little bit farcical. It's like the government saying, please, can we have our spaceship back? If that's what you believe, that somebody somewhere has crashed or landed craft. And of course, that is a narrative we've heard from whistleblowers, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But the idea that you would want to, if you push the UFO community on this and say, well, wait a minute, are you really saying that you want this given back to the very people that you believe have been gatekeepers of this secret for nearly 80 years, i.e. the government? And you're saying that this is a good thing, quite apart from the fact that as somebody who tends to take quite a libertarian view on a lot of issues, I'm not that keen on the idea that the government should come and take our stuff, whether it's your house or whether it's NHI craft or artifacts or whatever it is that we've acquired. So I don't agree that this has been blocked for quite the reasons some people think.
Okay, well, good. Yeah, it's such a difficult topic to really understand, and it's because there's so many perspectives and there's so many narratives and stories and ways that people are presenting the information, and we just I'm not an expert on it, which is why I wanted to talk to you and get your thoughts on everything. But I do attempt to follow the phenomenon as much as possible and understand what's going on. And I guess I end up kind of attempting to, I just end up falling on the side of the whistleblowers, like the people who are actually in the program or in and around the program, the people who have access to understanding what's going on. I mean, they could all be liars, but then aren't they risking life in prison and perjury for lying in front of Congress? It just feels like if we're going to find any amount of truth to this, you've got David Grush coming out and saying that there's this program, and he's talked to 40 people over 2 years, and everybody's like, oh well, I'm not going to listen to this guy because he's not a direct experiencer. He hasn't directly seen anything. So we get another guy come out who's like, I'm a helicopter pilot. I've picked one of these up, and everybody's like, oh, I don't care about you either. So I guess what are your thoughts on all of that, and just kind of like where do you stand in terms of like the reality of what's going on with this phenomenon?
Sure. I mean, it is whatever we're dealing with. I think it's real. I mean, I think that kind of debate has played itself out, and it's now. When I first got involved in this, it was a sort of, is it or isn't it? I think we've moved from that to it is, but what is it? Kind of, and again, to go back to your previous question, none of this, I think, would have happened without that rebranding from UFO to UAP, because that was no congressional representative was going to touch this. It was like a third rail. But the moment it was UAP and defense, national security, and safety of flight, all these people felt able to grip it and started asking questions. And when they started asking questions, they turned up the fact that, yeah, despite the denials, there had been and were programs. And so, yeah, the both the Senate and the House, the Armed Services Committees, the Intelligence Committees, the Oversight Committees pushed and are still pushing and found some of these people. And I've met, to pick up this point about the whistleblowers that you mentioned. Now, I've not met David Grush. And people say, oh, well, it's, skeptics will say it's secondhand information. Well, wait, I have met Jay Stratton a couple of times, 2 or 3 times. And the reason, I don't think this is fully appreciated, the reason David Grush spoke to 40 people about this isn't because he was doing some sort of side project or had some personal interest. Jay Stratton, when he was heading up the UAP task force, gave him that job. He said to David Grush, go into all 18 constituent parts of the US intelligence community. I mean, he was already in the IC, of course, at more senior level than people seem to realize, I think. Right. Jay gave him that tasking. He said, go into all the nooks and crannies, find out who's doing this, what program or programs do we have, and go talk to these people. And so that's what happened. So, but absolutely, these people are patriots. These people are heroes, I think. But they're heroes because, for the most part, as far as I'm aware, they are not, which I would condemn, leaking classified information. They are going through the process, and they are saying, look, if I'm going to do a interview or something, or if I'm going to write something, I will go to DOPSA, the Defense Office of Pre-Publication and Security Review, because even if you're sort of sitting in the intelligence community and you're thinking, hey, the public have a right to know, you need to know who the subject matter expert is, and then what is the damage assessment if that is leaked. Because, of course, people say, oh, it's a great thing to tell the American people this, but the moment you tell the American people this, you also tell the government in China and Russia and North Korea and Iran and anywhere, really. So you do have to be careful, particularly as if we are dealing with advanced technologies. Almost anything can be weaponized, particularly if it's something that generates large amounts of energy. And if what we're talking about is what people think it is or might be, if it does come from a non-human intelligence, whether that's extraterrestrial, interdimensional, whatever it is, one of the few good assumptions you can make is it's going to be to do what it does, to get here from there in a way that we can't. It's going to somehow generate a lot of energy, and that can be weaponized. So these people have to be careful. There is a line, and as far as I'm aware, they're not crossing it, but they're saying, let's have a conversation about how much of this we can responsibly reveal. And exactly as you said, David Grush has put his hand on the Bible in Congress and testified under oath. If any of that is not true, he has perjured himself, and that is an offense.
Yeah, it's a huge risk for anybody who wants to come out. And then they see how people are being treated when they do come out. And a lot of times there's a lot of ridicule. A lot of times they're going after things in his personal life. I mean, he said that he was threatened physically. So they're doing everything they can to make sure that people don't come out, it seems like.
Let me tell you exactly what happened with that. Yeah. It's an interesting story. David Grush came out with his testimony, and I'm not going to name names, but again, I think this is in the public domain. A particular journalist ran a story that David Grush had some psychological issues.
Right. I remember that.
And this then turned into a media story, and it threw shade on him at a critical time in the narrative. But then some other journalists started saying, and this was largely, I have to say, one of the great things about this, it was citizen journalism. And there's a lot of brilliant people on X and elsewhere doing this sort of stuff. And somebody got the backstory. And it turns out, and there's a paper trail, and in fact, the journalist confirmed this, so it's not disputed. what happened was the journalist did have contacts in the intelligence community serving members of the IC, and they basically let it be known to him that if he were to make freedom of information requests to a particular police department for a particular period of time, he might find an interesting story.
Wow.
So he did that, and he turned up these police reports that I believe David Grush's wife telephoned the cops to say that she had concerns about his behavior, and they came. And so there are two interesting things about this. One is the IC had clearly done this deliberately to smear him. And they caused the story to be run.
And who is that within the intelligence community? Is that a specific person or group of people that would have attempted to push this information to this reporter?
I don't know specifically who it was, and if I did know, I probably wouldn't say, because
I didn't know if it was known or not. But
no, and I think the journalist, to be fair, although I think he was used in a smear campaign, but to be fair to him, obviously he is not going to name his sources in the intelligence community, and I certainly respect him for that. Of course, it's self-interest. The moment you do that, you'll never get a story from them again.
Right.
But the point here was, just to finish off this story, I think, because this is important, the reason David Grush had these issues was that he had served his country with honor and distinction in Afghanistan and had seen some pretty terrible things there. So for anyone saying, that it was clearly a smear campaign aimed at portraying him as some sort of nut job.
Right.
Representative Tim Burchett said it best when he said, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said, David Grush has PTSD from his service in Afghanistan. He said, in Tennessee, he said, people don't mock people for having PTSD as a result of their career in the military. They thank them for their service.
Right. Yeah, that was a powerful statement that he made, and absolutely true. Yeah, it's. I mean, if he was just some wacko, if he wasn't who he says he was, and he wasn't telling the truth, why would the intelligence community push this, try to smear him?
Exactly. It's not worth their time. They're only going to come out and do this for someone who is who he says he is, and somebody who is pushing a narrative that they don't like. And that should the journalist obviously couldn't resist the story, but I think if he had thought about it a little bit harder, he might have realized the bigger story is, why are they doing this in the first place? So he got a kind of quick little, oh, hey, look, I've got a story about this guy that no one else has got. But if he'd done the truly honorable and deeper, more principled journalist thing, he would have arguably had an even bigger story. What is it about this guy and his narrative that is causing you to try and pull my strings and make me run a story throwing shade on this guy? That's the more interesting story. And absolutely, nobody gets near testifying in Congress without a whole bunch of people vetting them to say, is this person who they say they are? Did they do what they said they did, or not? And again, I'm not going to name names, but I remember when the David Grush story came out. Now, I've obviously long since retired from the UK Ministry of Defence, but I still do have, obviously, contacts. I spoke to, I think, when the David Grush story came out, my first question is this guy for real? In that week, I spoke to 3 individuals with backgrounds in the US intelligence community. And all 3 of them said to me not only, oh, yeah, this guy's for real, but also, yeah, I know Dave. And it was like, yeah, I know Dave. And so I got that confirmation pretty much from day one. And yeah.
So, I mean, he's telling the truth, right? I mean,
he is telling the truth, absolutely. Now, obviously, we still need a smoking gun. We still need, I mean, he by his own admission, has not seen this hardware, but he has spoken to people who said the program is real, the craft are real, and the entities are real. And I believe that other people at even more senior level in the intelligence community have made statements confirming that, or I'm not sure if those statements have yet been broadcast. I know obviously people do films and interviews all the time. It's a little bit of a dance with the Pentagon getting clearance for this, but I believe that people at even higher level in the intelligence community have said, we have craft, we have bodies. I don't know yet whether that has been broadcast or what the context is, but those statements are out there. And I mean, yeah, short of actually, people getting in a room with some of this stuff and getting hands on it, it's kind of difficult to say what more some people would ask than very senior people in the government, the military, the intelligence community who have had the policy responsibility for this saying it's real. And skeptics say, oh, well, David Grush, for example, never got his hands on a craft. I mean, to give a kind of, some people might say silly example, but I think it's a direct read across. I worked with plenty of people in Ministry of Defense headquarters who had responsibility for nuclear policy. They didn't necessarily ever handle a missile personally. That was done by the engineers and by the people, for example, in the ballistic missile submarines. Does that mean that these people's knowledge is any less because they have not touched a nuclear missile? Actually, if these are the policy people, I would say it flips that. They probably know more about the issue. So I'd rather, who would you rather talk to? Somebody who says, I once touched a UAP in a hangar somewhere. Well, great, they can tell you what it looks like, but that's about it. Who would you rather talk to? That person or the person who handled policy on this subject for the United States government? I want to talk to the policy person.
Yeah, for sure. It's crazy how much evidence is out there. I mean, you mentioned if somebody's touched a craft. I mean, Bob Lazar came out in 1989 and said that he was working on these and touched these craft, potentially from the same program, I guess, right? But
yeah, and at the time, I think a lot of people were very skeptical. For sure. Bob Lazar, still are.
Yeah.
That said, obviously, who pushed that story out? George Knapp.
Yep.
George Knapp certainly has a lot of contacts in the intelligence community, worked directly with people like James Lakatsky, senior intelligence officer in the Defense Intelligence Agency, probably one of the people who was responsible for setting up ORSAP initially, which morphed into ATIP. When you actually draw the connections between this and realize that the person that pushed out the Bob Lazar story actually George Knapp had the story about ATIP long before the New York Times published it.
Okay.
And when he knew that it was going to be published, George said, well, I could do this. And I had that story because he knew Harry Reid very well, of course, who, again, on the political side, was responsible for setting this up. And George did a very noble thing, actually. He said, look, he was talking to a lot of the people involved with this program, and they said, George, yeah, you could run that story, and in a fair world, maybe you should. You had that story, but with the greatest of respect, it will make more of an impact, which is what we want if it goes in the New York Times. And George sat on his hands and very nobly,
nice,
kind of, because he still passionately believes in the subject. And he was like, this is bigger than me.
Right.
And he did. I mean, I think, for a journalist who has a story of that impact,
that's tough.
agrees, that was a big thing. And nobody that really, I've done some freelance journalism, nobody that isn't in that world can really ever know how big a thing he did there.
Yeah. Probably not many people would do that. And it shows a lot about his character and his desire to have transparency and truth and disclosure.
His character, his integrity, absolutely. Yeah,
for sure. So you mentioned that we are past the point, and I'm paraphrasing here, but past the point of this being, past the point of a question of whether or not something is going on. Like we know the phenomenon is real, I guess, is what I think is for sure what I think, and I think what I'm paraphrasing from you from a few minutes back. If you had to pick like the primary evidence that, just for a couple of minutes, just to go over and say, this is what makes the phenomenon real, because we know this happened and this happened and this happened. I mean, obviously Nimitz, obviously Grush, but I mean, for you, what is it that has pushed the topic over the finish line?
It's the consistency of a small proportion of these UAP reports. And I mean, obviously, in percentage terms, most of what people see in the skies is going to have conventional explanations. These are misidentifications, sometimes hoaxes. But to answer the question, it's the existence of a small proportion of UAP sightings consistently for decades that have demonstrated speeds, maneuvers, and acceleration, orders of magnitude above and beyond the cutting edge of our own technology, including secret prototype aircraft, missiles, and drones, in a position where not only do we have the testimony of, for example, the pilots who have chased these things, but we have data, and those data are sometimes photographs and films, but more often they are radar data. These things are simultaneously tracked. So they're seen by pilots, tracked by radar, filmed on, for example, forward-looking infrared cameras. We've seen some of those videos now. There's a whole bunch more that we haven't yet seen. And also the existence of MASINT, which is it stands for measurement and signature intelligence. It's a discipline of, when you talk about intelligence, you have a whole different bunch of acronyms and abbreviations. So you have HUMINT, which is human intelligence. What are your spies and your assets telling you? You have satellite intelligence. You have OSINT, open source intelligence. You have MASINT, and we have MASINT on UAP. A lot of that's still classified, and MASINT is a very broad discipline, so it can actually include, for example, satellite data. And we have on the record, for example, former Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe confirming that we have satellite imagery of UAP that is not yet publicly released. And again, it's like, what more do we want? So that is my simple answer to your question. What pushes this over the line? The existence of this body of data, and those data, like I say, some of it is expert testimony from either pilots who have seen these things or chased them, or, as we discussed earlier, people in these programs who've had policy responsibility for this saying that it's real. Jay Stratton, Lou Elizondo, David Grush, Jim Semivan, Eric Davis, James Lukatsky, those sorts of individuals. And there comes a point where you say, look, okay, what if some, being silly, but what if some nut job had somehow gotten into the intelligence community and I don't know, gone or had some sort of breakdown, gone rogue, and come out with a narrative to say NHI is real. But that's not what is happening. What is happening is a whole bunch of different people, senior intelligence officers in multiple different agencies, political individuals who've gotten close to this through congressional oversight, who've come out of classified briefings, sometimes with, you can get into, you've done enough interviews to be able to read, and again, your work as a senior business leader, you can read people's body language, I bet.
For sure.
You can look at I've seen people come out of those classified briefings looking almost shell-shocked. And those videos, I think there's a great, I think on social media, he's Oscar Paul, and he does this. He and others, I think, have kind of hung around. They know when the classified briefings are, and they stick a microphone and a camera in the face of these people after these classified briefings. But it's this consistent narrative that we have. So it's not some maverick.
Yeah.
It's not somebody who's had a breakdown. It is this consistent narrative from deep insiders, whether they're politicians who come out of these classified briefings looking shell-shocked, whether it's senior intelligence community people who've handled this from the policy aspect, whether it's the pilots who've seen them, whether it's the radar operators who've tracked them. And it seems to me that we have built up now what I would say, by any reasonable person's assessment, is a critical mass that has pushed us from having this debate about is this real or not, over the line where our question should now be, well, what is it? What are we dealing with? What is the intelligence behind this, and what is the agenda?
Right. Yeah, it's difficult to imagine that there are still people who don't get that this is a real phenomenon. It's I've been trying to follow this thing for the last 35 years, give or take, and it's just gotten more and more intense, and the amount of evidence has just grown and grown and grown. But I still go out and I talk to my friends, which is why I wanted to start a podcast, to meet new friends, because my friends they don't get it. They're like, until one lands on my lawn, I'm not going to believe that this is a real phenomenon. And it's just, I think I'm with you. I think we have to get past that, and those have to be those are just the people that are doing no research, that know nothing about the phenomenon. And B, it just doesn't fit into whatever reality that they've created that they're living in. And so they just hand wave it and just dismiss it. But the evidence for this being real is now, it's beyond overwhelming. It's conclusive.
Yes, there is an old way of thinking about this, and there's a new way. And I think your friends are are in that old way.
Right.
Because the old narrative was UFOs, and of course all that, as I say, why we branded it, all the pop culture baggage, so UFO in a lot of people's minds still equals science fiction and conspiracy theory and crazy stories. UAP, so the new think way of looking at this is, Senate Intelligence Committee holding a classified briefing on that thing that we've been talking about. And I think if the challenge is, how do you move people from old think to new think when there's so much information on this? What's somebody's best route into it? And I don't really have an answer for that, because this is a story with an 80-year backstory, and it is big. There is a lot to it, and you can't just say, here's a quick, way from old think to new think. You have to say it's a vast, and we've discussed this vast body of information from government officials, pilots, whoever it is.
How much more evidence is there out there? I mean, there's an infinite number of evidence. There's millions of people that have had experiences that they can't explain. But are you aware of, and maybe you can't even answer this question, but how much are you aware of that is out there being looked at that's just yet to be released, that's just classified and that can't be released? I mean, is there compelling video evidence, witness evidence, photographic evidence? What's the stuff that we're not seeing, I guess? What are your thoughts there?
I have not seen this material directly.
Okay.
However, I have been told by people who I trust implicitly, and people, again, who are well placed to know that there is more to come.
Okay.
And that more to come will include better photos and videos and more information. But again, it goes back to, I think, the central problem of this. And of course, literally, I think a few days before I flew here to do this interview, yet another story dropped. Right. Jake Barber,
right.
The egg-shaped UAP. The problem with all of this is that it's in some people's minds, it's just another video. And okay, this is daylight. It's up close and personal. But it goes back to what I was saying about who do you want to talk to? The person who's had a hand on the side of one of these things on a hanger, that's only going to tell me what it looked like. A video is only ever going to tell you that. I think what people really want, as much as people say, I want to see the good videos, well, I guarantee that if we're doing another interview in a year's time, we will have more videos. But what we may still not have is sort of A, official confirmation of this, but B, if we don't get that, at least a deep insider, this is our best assessment of what we are dealing with and what it wants, because it wants something. And, we can get into this, but I don't have a definitive answer to this. I mean, obviously there's a whole bunch of different theories. Some people think that it's extraterrestrial. Some people believe that it's interdimensional. Other people, there is certainly a faction of people still serving who believe that this is real but demonic, and that this is why we shouldn't disclose it or even engage with it, because that feeds it. I mentioned that because people kind of think, oh, well, no one would believe that. And yes, absolutely they do.
People do.
Lou Elizondo has told the anecdote that when he was briefing a very senior person in the Pentagon, trying to get engagement on that. The guy said, son, go read your Bible. And it was not like, that's all nonsense. We shouldn't be wasting resources on it. It was, no, it's real, but because I think it's demonic, I also believe we should not engage with it. And so it might be that. I occasionally like to speculate that it might be something that we don't have a word for, or don't even have the conceptual ability at the current level of human development to really process. I mean, you could not, for example, explain quantum physics to a chimpanzee.
Or to a human.
Or to a human. Certainly not to me.
Right.
What is that great quote? It's from one of the theoretical physicists. It's something like, anyone who isn't shocked by quantum theory hasn't understood it.
Right.
I think it was Niels Bohr or maybe Max Planck or whoever it was. I think it's the same with UAP.
Niels Bohr, yeah.
Right. Okay.
Ryan's quick.
We are being instantly fact-checked here. This is good.
Yeah.
Well, not fact-checked, but the answers to these questions are being provided for us. But yeah, I think the point is, what if UAP and this, NHI, non-human intelligence, is the latest kind of phrase? What if it is something that we can't currently comprehend? So I often give the example of somebody waking up in the middle of the night, seeing a shadowy figure at the foot of their bed. Religious people might think it's an angel. Paranormal researchers might think it's a ghost. People in the UFO community might think they're being abducted by aliens.
Right.
Is any one of those individuals right or wrong? Well, maybe they're all wrong.
Yeah.
But maybe it's something that kind of like quantum theory, it like wave particle duality. When we interact with it, it collapses into a reality that maybe takes something from the individual. So, a ghost hunter will see a ghost. A ufologist will see an alien. A religious person will see an angel or a demon. Is that what UAP and NHI is? Or, and this is one of my latest ideas that I've kind of tried to kickstart a little confirmation on this. If people say, well, why don't we just disclose? And I say, look, I don't know, but let's suppose that it's all true and that there is, as many people in the program have testified, craft and bodies. If disclosure was easy, we would have done it by now. It would be the easiest thing in the world. The president goes on TV, Oval Office, my fellow Americans, people of the world, we are not alone. And you could, and I said earlier, of course, well, what about the technology? Some of that, could be weaponized. You wouldn't want that getting into hands of an adversary. Absolutely fair enough. But you could ring fence it. You could say, my fellow Americans, people of the world, we're not alone. We are being interacted with. Now, there's some technology, but because the United States is in possession of that, and we don't want adversaries to have that, we are not going to talk about that. And everyone would kind of probably be very frustrated, but they would kind of say, fair enough. Conceptually, you'd be able to understand the decision. And you could do that, but that's not what's happening. There seems to be, this is my point here, there seems to be something about the existence of this, the reality of this, in and of itself, that can't be disclosed. And that must be something that, unlike the technology, which you could ring fence, you could separate it out and say, we're going to do this, but not that. It's so it's so much part of the story that you couldn't extract it. And what might that be? What is, and the phrase that I've used is, a secret too terrible to be told. There must be something that makes this difficult, because, as I say, if it wasn't difficult, someone would have done it in 80 years. And so what is that secret? What is something too terrible to be told? And is it perhaps, this is pretty much the only thing that I can think of, something that would so shatter our worldview, our sense of self, that it would lead not just to societal upheaval, but to maybe sort of personal upheaval, but not in a good way. And that might be that something about this would absolutely confirm, I don't know, simulation theory, that reality is just an illusion and that we're just living in the matrix, and that we're the construct of, we're the self-aware, or so we think, we're the construct of some architect who has made, whether it's a science experiment or a video game, I don't know, but maybe it's absolute confirmation that we're living in a simulation, or maybe it's...
How could you get confirmation of that?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
But some of the Silicon Valley billionaires are invested in this and are quietly funding a little bit of research to see if it's true, and maybe to bust us out of the matrix. I have heard some theories about quantum computing. I'm not an expert, so I'm probably getting this wrong, but people can look it up. There is a theory that if you ran a quantum computer, as some people have postulated they could be developed, that might involve utilizing so much energy from the simulation that the simulation could no longer run, and it would kind of collapse the simulation. Now, that might not be a smart thing to do, because maybe that would end the universe and end all of our consciousness, self-awareness, life, however you define that. So maybe that's the secret. Or maybe the secret, too terrible to be told, is that something about this has to do with death, or where we go after we die. And again, when I first developed this idea, which is comparatively recent, I thought, do we have any clues that might validate this? And then I remembered or noticed three things, and that three very prominent individuals who have been deeply invested in the UAP world in terms of research and investigation suddenly pivoted and started looking at life after death. And those three individuals are Robert Bigelow, John Mack, and Leslie Kean. And obviously three very well connected individuals. John Mack, of course, no longer with us, but Robert Bigelow, of course, got the ATIP contract and knows a lot of these people who we've discussed. People like Senator Harry Reid and James Lakatsky, people who've had experiences, who've run programs, or in Harry Reid's place, politically set up programs. Bigelow, Kean, Mack, all kind of looked at the UAP issue and then did this, okay, I'm done with that. Now, I'm not necessarily done, but when did you last hear Bigelow talk about UAP? You would think that after his 60 Minutes interview, and then after the New York Times running the story about ATIP, that he would have dominated the narrative on this. And yet he has been staggeringly quiet. And what a perfect platform he would have. And it's not because journalists haven't asked him, but he has chosen not to be involved. And his latest venture is a whole series of essays that he's commissioned and funded about life after death. Why is it that three well-placed individuals who've looked at the UAP issue have suddenly pivoted to life after death? And again, could that be validation of this idea that there is a secret too terrible to be told and that it has something to do with death?
Yeah. Yeah, it could be. Could be. Yeah, it's super interesting. And it's obviously some speculation involved to go down that, but it's
fun speculation, interesting
for sure.
speculation,
No
I think, because these are what I call second order questions. And like I said, with the pivot from is UAP real or not to what is UAP,
right?
Second order questions are often far more interesting.
For
questions
sure.
like, what is it about this that makes it so difficult? And related to that, what would be, and I did a whole TV series, I created and hosted a whole TV series called After Contact, which asked what I think is the most interesting second order question, pretty much, is what would be the societal impact on this, on politics, religion, science, technology, philosophy, economics.
No, it's yeah, for sure. So what makes you suspect that we could even know of, what's happening after, or what the phenomenon could be? I mean, so we've retrieved craft. In theory, we think that we've retrieved craft. That's from the whistleblowers. We think that we're working on the craft. David Grush said that non-human biologics came with a lot of the craft. And so if we're out there and we find a craft and it's laying there somewhere, we go pick it up, we go analyze it, there's some bodies in it, how could we ever really figure out what it is?
That is a very interesting question. And I think it gets to the heart of another area where I would argue that we need to get away from old think and into new think. Old think would be, this is a spaceship, and therefore it has an energy source and a propulsion system, and we should figure that out, and then that way humanity can go to the stars. And I agree with Elon Musk on this. We must become interplanetary. At the moment, we have all our eggs in one basket, one big comet or asteroid strike, and it's game over, or however it might. And inevitably, obviously, at some point in our future, the sun will expand and become a red giant. We need to move off Earth, first to Mars, but eventually we'll need to go interstellar. And so, yeah, absolutely energy source, propulsion system, but that's still old think. And I think one way to maybe rebrand this and get to the new think is to stop, and I know this is counterintuitive for a lot of people, stop thinking about the craft in terms of it being a transportation device. I mean, it may be a transportation device, but it may not be. I think it's more helpful and maybe broadens out our thinking if we stop thinking of it as a transportation device and start thinking of it as a device. And then the question becomes, well, what does it do? What can it do? And this goes back to the point about chimpanzees and quantum physics, because let me give a nice example. If you were to take your smartphone and somehow send it back in time 10 years, And I don't know what model you have, but let's suppose it's an iPhone 14 or something like that.
15, yeah.
Oh, 15. Yeah. I'm losing count of where we are.
I think we're 16 now. I think, but I'm not totally sure.
Yeah. I've got a 22, but I got that at the Time Travel Conference.
Oh, nice.
For anyone who's thinking, oh, Nick's... no. But if you were to take your iPhone, send it back 10 years, and the folks at Apple got their hands on it, they would be like, wow, this is amazing. But they would probably be able to figure it out and back engineer it, reverse engineer it. If you sent it back 20, 30 years, they would probably, figure out what it was, but they might struggle to recreate it. If you sent it back 200, 300 years, no. If you send it back 10,000 years, it's a magic shiny rock, a flat shiny rock that does things, and you would either worship it or think it's the devil or something like that. So,
or maybe you just connect in the network.
Okay,
just
connect.
all these Göbekli Tepe ancient civilization people with their walking around with their cell phones.
Yeah. And of course, as you know, there are people who look at some of the hieroglyphs and say some of that looks like it might be technology, the so-called handbags, for example. But
no, I'm with you.
No,
don't mean to.
So yeah, I think if we stop thinking of UAP as a transportation device, let alone a spaceship, I mean, maybe it serves as a device and brings something here, or maybe it takes us somewhere else. But it may fulfill a number of different roles, just as your smartphone can act as a telephone where you can call someone up, but also as a camera,
right.
And also as a way in which you can access information. I mean, it's multi-rolled. If we start with the new thinking of UAP and specifically the craft as a multi-role device, the question is, what are those roles? Can we understand it? The answer may be no. Maybe it is like, well, let's just suppose it is extraterrestrial. There might be civilizations out there 1 billion years ahead of us. Could we understand that technology? Of course not. Might we understand some broad concepts? Maybe,
Possibly.
But maybe not. I don't know. But I think the new think should be, this is a device. What functions does it fulfill? And is there a way for us to access those functions? Because some of the people, like David Grush, have talked about this. Again, old think, new think. Old think is these things crashed. New think is that on some occasion, these things have been left for us. Some people might use the phrase gifts from the gods. Well, if you're given something, what does it do?
Yeah.
And it's like if you were given an advanced smartphone and you didn't really know much about it, I guarantee you'd start pressing the buttons. You'd start off and eventually you'd hit some function and something would get accessed and you would figure out, hey, this thing works there's a camera on this.
Sure. Right.
Well, with UAP, that's what I hope is happening. But maybe, like I say, secret too terrible to be told, maybe some of those functions take us, maybe literally, maybe metaphorically, maybe both, to something a little bit dark side. And maybe government and some of the people that have knowledge of this know that. Remember that one of the smartest questions anyone asked Lou Elizondo was when they said, if you could sum up in one word how people should feel if they knew what you knew about this, what would that one word be? And he thought very carefully, and he said somber. Well, maybe he's right with that, but maybe it goes a little bit more dark side than somber. What if his answer had been terrified?
Terrified, sure, yeah.
What if his view had been shattered in that sense of our paradigm and worldview and sense of self?
Right. Yeah, somber is almost like we're being used for something or something.
Yeah.
You know? It's
but and of course people react in different ways, so and you can't predict that.
Right.
What if Lou's answer is somber, but what if somebody else knows that, well, actually the answer is a range starting at somber and ending up as absolutely blank terrified?
Right. I'm curious to get your thoughts on some of the current events that are happening as well, and that release of that video with the whistleblower that just came out. I'm curious where your head is on that one.
It's a tricky one because, again, it speaks to this central difficulty that what does a picture actually show you? Just the shape of something. It doesn't really tell you anything about capability, intent, anything like that. I mean, you can look at it and say, well, yeah, fine, but that doesn't tell me what function the thing fulfills. It doesn't tell me anything about who or what made it or why. And of course, although I've got no reason to doubt the authenticity, but in these days of AI generated imagery and it's a picture is, I mean, I'm not saying it's meaningless, but it really doesn't tell you much more than the shape of something and gives you an approximation of size. In one of my media interviews about this story, I was asked what I thought, and I said, what I think is we need more information. Right. And that goes back to this big picture that you have all these pieces of information, testimony from pilots, but also some of the technical data, whether it's satellite, radar, infrared, whatever it is. So you have something like this image, but then you need the backstory and specifically, I mean, I think that the thing that you would need, which as of right now maybe this is moving so quickly that, when you have these sorts of discussions, maybe you'll say, oh no, that's just been revealed or something. But unless I missed it when I was traveling or something, we don't have, for example, the pickup location or the drop-off location. I mean, if that film is what it purports to be, somebody basically picked up and dropped off an object, some questions that come to mind are, like I say, from where was it picked up? Where was it dropped off? Where is it now? Who authorized the pickup and drop off? I mean, who is the commanding officer? What military or other unit was this? Under whose authorization was this operation conducted? What's the name of the operation? The military tend to kind of give pretty much everything an op name, whether it's the Gulf War or something more limited. Well, if you have the name of the operation, the unit that has the sort of policy, functional responsibility for this, Congress can then go and ask the right question. But without those pieces of information, you don't even know whose door to knock on. But get enough pieces of the information, and you do know, okay, if I'm a staffer working for the Senate Intelligence Committee, my boss comes to me and says, I've seen this video. I want the person who authorized that op so that we can say, what is this thing? From that, I don't even know what door to knock on. But like I say, get those information points, those data points, and then I, as the staffer, can say, okay, I need to go and speak to my liaison officer at CIA, and that's the person I need to ask, and these are the questions, and then we'll get someone in for a classified briefing, if not a public hearing. But so that picture is interesting, but it is really only the start of the conversation.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's just the beginning of it. Yeah, the picture by itself means nothing. It's just how did it come about? What is the person is the person really doing? Are they who they say they are? Are they doing what they say that they're doing? If so, I mean, now we've got somebody from within the program who's actually working and flying helicopters and picking this stuff up. I mean, that feels like a pretty big deal, at least as something to pursue and something to try to figure out, hey, is there something here or not?
Yes, but I would put one rider onto that, which I don't think I have heard publicly mentioned. And in one sense, I think it's an obvious point, but it's not one that I've seen the UFO community discuss. If any of these people, and I mentioned earlier that obviously most of the people in this field, in most of their activities, have been very careful not to cross the line, have submitted material for clearance through DOPSA at the Pentagon. But we should never forget that we're dealing, a lot of this narrative is coming from people who were in the intelligence community, where deception is kind of almost like everyday business because of what you're doing, whether that's counterintelligence or whatever it is, whether it's a psyop, a psychological operation to shape and manipulate opinion.
So those people in the counterintelligence community that have come from the counterintelligence community, Lou Elizondo, right?
Lou is specifically, I mean, one of his skill sets is counterintelligence. That's what he was brought into ORSAP originally to do before his initiative with ATIP. But he was brought on board to do the CI for ORSAP. So he is, I mean, a lot of people in the intelligence community will know how to do counterintelligence, but some of them will be deep specialists, and Lou is a deep specialist. But almost everyone will know, you know, the basics. And my point is I guess, it's this, that if these people are, if not crossing the line, but going right up to it, they will be very careful. And one way in which they can be very careful is that they can maybe change the narrative. If you want to get something out, but you want to maybe protect the original source, you will change maybe a couple of parts of the story so that if somebody is trying to then unmask you, they won't know who leaked it, for example. So you might, what I'm saying is that people should bear in mind that the people telling these accounts are very often trained to alter some aspects of the story to protect the original source. And I'm just asking the question, you know, maybe that's happening with some of this. And so let's suppose I was somebody with a background in the CIA and I wanted to leak something. With classified information, particularly on a very niche subject, there's very limited pool of suspects. So if I could alter the narrative and hide the fact that my background was CIA and make people think that my background was NSA, for example, then if anyone was looking for me, they'd be looking in the wrong place. So all I'm saying is that be wary that what you're getting might be the truth, but might have some aspects altered. So not everything will check out, and that might be quite deliberate, and it might be aimed at protecting the identity, for example, of someone who is still serving.
But so those people might be Grush, they might be this new guy, Baker or Barker.
Barber, isn't it?
Barber.
Barber, Jake Barber.
Thank you.
But remember, I mean, while I remember, that's a very interesting point. When David Grush, I discussed how I had privately, through three members of three former members of the intelligence community, I was able to get quick confirmation, yeah, David Grush is for real. But when the media fact-checked that story, two people validated it. One was Carl Nell, who we now have heard from in public. But one was somebody else still serving in the intelligence community who was given the pseudonym, I think it was Jonathan Gray. Gray obviously being a kind of joke, but my point is there are reasons why you would want to distort a story or change a few key facts to mask the identity of someone still serving, because you want those people on the inside. So
what might be false about I mean, you've got these guys coming out, but then you've got, in addition to that, you've got Arrow, which seems like it was created to debunk the guys who are coming out and the whistleblowers. And so why would you create whistleblowers to come out and release a story if you're going to create another organization to debunk it?
Well, I'm tempted to say that's just the way intelligence works. It's what is the phrase? It's a wilderness of mirrors, where I can't remember who first coined that phrase, but it describes perfectly, I think, what goes on. Sometimes, if you want to get a story out, maybe somebody else puts out your story. So when you ask what might be changed, anything could be changed. The whistleblower putting out the story may not be the original source. It may be a retired person who has agreed to act as a conduit to get a story out. Or, as I say, there might be something subtle like changing your backstory to change the agency so that people are looking for leakers in the wrong place. So that might be an aspect.
Okay. Yeah, it's like I mentioned earlier, it's a frustrating topic because it feels like I want to trust somebody.
Well, as the X-Files kind of catchphrase goes, trust no one.
Yeah, I know. It's just difficult to get to the solution with that. Like what's actually going on, and yeah, it's just a frustrating topic. There's so much to it. There's so many nuances. There's so many different people, different players, different narratives that are being pushed.
Yeah. And Arrow, under its current leadership, to pick up your point on Arrow, may be a very different organization to Arrow under its previous leadership of Sean Kirkpatrick.
Yeah, that's given them the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, and there's another point, of course.
They're going to try, for sure. They're going to try to recovery, whatever, to change a face and to have it look like they're actually interested in this stuff, But
this is where Congress needs to step up and do its job.
Yeah.
Arrow was established as a result of a mandate from Congress, and it's also therefore incumbent on Congress to hold their feet to the fire. And if they don't think that they're doing a good job, or if they think they've gone over to the dark side, for want of a better phrase, then Congress is best placed to hold them to account and to get them to change their policy. And, of course, the media has a role there as well in asking smart questions, not necessarily accepting every narrative that they're spoon-fed. That doesn't mean you have to turn into a full-blown conspiracy theorist, but it does mean you have to strike the balance between accepting what you're told, as being broadly true, but pushing back, asking hard questions. And if you think that something is, most people, I know this is a statement a lot of people don't agree with, but most times, even these people deep on the inside, they don't really tell direct lies. But you do get lies of admission, of omission, pardon me, and you do get statements that are misleading. So call it spin, or however you want to term it. And so Congress must hold AARO to account. The media, including citizen journalists, must hold AARO to account. And of course, it's timely that we're having this conversation because, of course, whatever one's politics, we have a new administration, and it's incumbent on the new administration to take a role on this. And of course, I remember a few days before the inauguration, a question came up to President Trump, President-elect as he was then, and I think it was about the drones, and he said, I'll have a report on that on day one. Now, actually, what happened was on the evening of the inauguration, when Trump was in the Oval Office signing those executive orders that came out on the first day, somebody, I think it was Peter Ducey, shouted out a question. It was pretty impressive multitasking. He'd been at it all day. He had a fairly hectic schedule. His one of his aides, not his chief of staff, one of his aides was handing him the executive orders to sign. He was having a side conversation about what each of them were. And then there were at least two journalists in the room, maybe more, shouting out questions. And one question was about the drones. And he said, what do we know anything about that? And that was a conversation. He turned, I think, to his chief of staff who was in the room, said, what do we know about that? Can we get a report on that? So there is a commitment to get an answer on the drones very early.
But is it anything, these drones, is it anything that people need to be worried about?
No, I think it's terrible. I would like to find out what it is and tell the people.
And can you commit to some kind of...
In fact, I'd like to do that. Could we find out what that was, Susie? Okay? Yeah, why don't we find out immediately? I can't imagine it's an enemy, or there would have been, people would have gotten blown up all over. Maybe they were testing things. I don't know why they wouldn't have said what it was.
So, I think the journalist who shouted out the question was Peter Ducey. And when he said Susie, I think that's a reference to his chief of staff. So there is that commitment to go and get an answer. Also, of course, and obviously there is a linkage between the drone story and the wider UAP story. When Trump was on Joe Rogan asked about the JFK files. Of course, in his first term, President Trump released some of the JFK files, but not all. And then in between, he was, I was going to call it the interregnum, but we can't call it that, can we? In his wilderness years. And he said, well, next time I will release all the files, including the JFK files that I did not release last time. And then Joe Rogan was obviously about to ask another question, and Trump anticipated his question and segued to UFOs and said, and there's a lot of interest in UFOs too. And it was clear Rogan was going to go from the JFK files to UFOs. And indeed, in one of his recent interviews, again, Trump said JFK files, RFK files, MLK files, and other areas of public interest. And it was kind of clear in his mind, given that he anticipated Joe Rogan's question, that he links these issues. So given that he's made a commitment to release information on the JFK assassination, and he's made a commitment to say what they know about the drones in New Jersey, it's kind of implicit in that, well, you know, given that drones is really just a subset of the wider UAP conversation, what about the UAP situation? And so I think watch closely how this unfolds, because not least, he will be, I mean, very few people can hold him to maybe Elon Musk if he were vocal on this, but I think Joe Rogan is someone who he will listen to, and he'll know that he's made that commitment, and Joe Rogan will remember that he's made that commitment. And the media, hopefully, again, going back to the point about the media must do their jobs. They must say, hey, Mr. President, you know, we haven't had that report on drones yet. And by the way, while we're talking about drones, what about UAP?
Yeah, right. Yeah, it makes total sense. Yeah, it's felt like we need a president to come out and just acknowledge that it's real for it to gain more mass acceptance among the general population. Not just a president in one political party. You probably need a president from each political party, one after the other, to say that this is real in order for this thing to start to gain some acceptance amongst the American population. Yes, and this goes back to the point that maybe the reason that hasn't happened so far is because of this dark side, this secret too terrible to be told. But if ever there is a president who is likely to do it, it's Trump in his second term, because he is a maverick, a populist, somebody who doesn't like whether you call it the deep state or the bureaucracy. And if ever there was a president who would sort of go rogue, go maverick, and there may be good reasons for keeping this secret, but what the hell, I'm just going to come out with it. It's Trump in his second term with nothing to lose. Right. And looking to write his legacy. The problem, of course, is that despite the bipartisan nature of the congressional engagement that I mentioned earlier, if Trump were to do that, just the adversarial divided nation at the moment means that half the population, if Trump goes on live TV in the Oval Office and says, my fellow Americans, people of the world, we're not alone. Right. Half the population are going to say, I don't believe a word of it. It's fake news. Right. And if it was the other way around, if Biden had done it before leaving office, it would have been the other way around. Half the population would have said, that's fake news, just a different half. Right. So wherever we are with this, only half the people are going to believe it. The other half are going to think it's some sort of psychological operation. I've heard the phrase false flag alien invasion bandied around. I've even been accused of being a part of that myself. Project Bluebeam. Project Bluebeam, ramp up the threat narrative, fake an alien invasion so that you can introduce a sort of space patriot act and take away people's freedoms. Right. I don't believe that, but the fact that conversation is even going on tells you something about society, and it is an issue. And I think maybe that's one of the impediments to disclosure. Is this, how could we unpack this in a way that it won't just splinter the nation along bipartisan political lines with
with basically the half of the population whose candidate isn't currently in power saying, I don't believe a word of this. And worse, I think it's all some dastardly government plot to make us think this for nefarious purposes.
Well, if we get to those kind of second level questions that you mentioned before, so we know that the phenomenon is real. It seems like there's basically three camps, I think, on this thing. And I just had Chris Bledsoe in the studio last week, and so he's of the camp that this is a spiritual phenomenon or even a religious phenomenon where you're talking about spiritual energy and orbs, and the crafts themselves are maybe not even whole solid crafts. They can be energy-based, light-based crafts. And then you've got people who are in the human intelligence camp. So I've talked to several people who are, this is all human intelligence. We've been reverse engineering this stuff for a while. It's all ours, and that's what we're seeing everywhere. Then you've got people in the non-human intelligence camp, which are the people saying that it's alien, it's either extraterrestrial or interdimensional. And then you've got people, fourth group, saying it's future humans. So based on all of your research and the work that you've done and the stuff that you've seen, I mean, do you lean towards any one of those things as a more likely possibility than the other?
I think if I were to have to pick one, I would lean towards extraterrestrial. However, I'm very well aware that may be my own kind of cultural bias, because that, I guess, was the leading sort of alternative theory to this all being explainable for so long, that I can't really disprove that I'm not leaning that way just because that's how I came in. It's the door I came in, because ideas, for example, of other dimensions were, when I was growing up, just science fiction, really. I mean, now we have Michio Kaku, and other proponents of string theory, for example, saying that extra or hidden dimensions are actually necessary if the equations in string theory are to actually work. And experimentally, people say, we should be using the scientific method for this. Well, he is probably one of the world's most famous, if not the world's most famous scientist. I guess Stephen Hawking when he was alive, and Einstein before him. Now Michio Kaku, perhaps Avi Loeb. Michio Kaku can hardly be accused of not being scientific. And yet there he is at the Large Hadron Collider Particle Accelerator at CERN, looking for these so-called hidden dimensions. But that was kind of not really discussed as a serious possibility until recently. So I lean towards extraterrestrial, but who knows? And here's the other thing. The other day I was doing a media interview on the New Jersey drones, and somebody said, "What do you think it is?"
That was going to be my next question.
Well, I said, there is no one answer to that. It is a lot of things. Some of what people are seeing are hobbyist drones. Some are law enforcement drones. Some are other, maybe commercial drones. Some might be adversary drones. Some clearly are just people misidentifying aircraft lights, helicopter lights, bright stars and planets, all the media
swamp
coverage.
Gas.
Yeah, bit of swamp gas, media, a bit of mass hysteria. The media has whipped people up to, but still, my answer stands. It's a lot of things. So when you say, where do you lean? I can lean whichever way I like on, but the answer to the question, what is this, might be all of the above. I mean, if it just, let's suppose you've recovered, or elements in government have recovered a craft, a device, whatever you want to call it. It might be, let's suppose it's extraterrestrial. Doesn't mean that one warehouse over, there isn't one that came from another dimension. And the next warehouse, one that came from the future. So all of the above is a possible answer. Just because possibility A turns out to be true in this situation doesn't mean that possibilities B, C, and D are taken off the table. So it could be all of the above or some of the above. It could be none of the above, which takes us back to this idea of, could it be something that we don't have words for? I mean, our words, they're just labels we stick on something, but what if it is something totally beyond our ability to understand or even conceive of in its true form?
Yeah, you mentioned future humans potentially, and I know that was something that came from you've encountered it in the past at the Ministry of Defense working on the Rendlesham case.
Yes, the Rendlesham Forest was really, I guess, the best known British case, December 1980. So before my time in the Ministry of Defense, but I did a cold case review on it and subsequently met most of the first-hand witnesses, including Colonel Charles Holt, the Deputy Base Commander, who started as a skeptic on this, then saw the UFO himself and ended up as one of the witnesses.
He physically went out there and saw it?
On the first night, something landed in the forest, and a number of personnel saw this. The ones that got closest were John Burroughs and Jim Penniston. I subsequently, I met them. In fact, we ended up writing a book on the case, John Burroughs, Jim Penniston, and myself, and it's the only book that I am aware of on this subject of UAP that needed security clearance of the manuscript prior to publication from both the Pentagon, the Defense Office of Pre-Publication Security Review that I mentioned earlier, DOPSA, and the Ministry of Defense.
Wow.
So
if there's nothing there, why would they need that?
Yeah. So I didn't want, I'm not like I'm not a whistleblower. I know where the line is. So I didn't set out to write something that would disclose classified information, but obviously, if you write a 100,000 word book, you have to be absolutely watertight on that for legal reasons. So, and any publisher, and I was with Macmillan, no big publisher will touch a book like that without being assured that it has gone through the process, because they are not going to publish something and then find that they get a cease and desist from the Pentagon. So they need to see a piece of paper to say, look, because this book has been co-written by an official at the UK Ministry of Defence who had policy responsibility for UAP, and two retired US Air Force officers who encountered UAP while on duty, they need that bit of paper. Macmillan, as the publishers, needed that bit of paper to say these guys have gone through the proper process and got security clearance. So yeah, that was something we did, and we did it willingly. But yeah, John Burroughs and Jim Penniston saw this on the first night. It had landed in the forest, and there's a sketch.
And this was near a military base?
Yes. Bentwaters and Woodbridge are two United States Air Force bases on British soil. So, and Rendlesham Forest lies between Bentwaters and Woodbridge. This is a sketch Jim Penniston made in his notebook at the time. it's about 9 feet across, maybe 9 feet tall at its highest point. He also saw strange symbols on the side of it.
Like hieroglyphs?
Like kind of hieroglyphs. Now, one of the interesting things about Jim is one of his skill sets was Warsaw Pact aircraft recognition. He could look. He was one of these people that could look at flashcards, even of the silhouette of any Soviet or Warsaw Pact military aircraft, and he'd go, "That's an SU, 35 or a MiG 29 or whatever the numbers are, and whatever variants." And so when Jim was looking at this craft and those symbols, he was like, "Well, when I say that this is like nothing I've seen before, that's a pretty dramatic statement." Because some people were saying, "Well, you saw strange symbols. Might they have been Cyrillic alphabet?" And he was like, "No." And he's like, "I know what that is. I know every symbol on the side of every aircraft." And he got close enough to touch the side of this craft, which he said afterwards. He said, "Yeah, that was probably a pretty dumb idea." But curiosity. And he said, and this is probably the most controversial part of the story, he said that he received what he could only describe as a sort of telepathic download of ones and zeros.
Right when he touched it?
When he touched it.
Yeah.
Now, he thought nothing more about it. He then got this compulsion to write down 16 pages of ones and zeros in his notebook a few evenings later, and promptly put that aside for decades, not least because he stayed in the service. It's one thing to say that you've seen a UFO. He was kind of okay because his deputy base commander saw it too, so that's fine. But you can't say, "And I then got a telepathic download from the craft," otherwise you're out. And he was in the PRP program, which was a personnel reliability program thing, very high security clearance. He would have lost that in an instant if he'd started talking about this sort of thing. So he didn't say anything about it for years, but then he kind of came out with it. He's like, "I don't know what to make of it." The producers of Ancient Aliens actually got the story. They found a computer scientist called Nick Sisk, who just, now there are websites that can do this, but at the time I'm not sure there were. But he translated it from binary, and there was a message. And the message reads, "Exploration of humanity, continuous for planetary advance, eyes of your eyes, origin year 8100, which is what put him on to time travel as a possibility for this. And then a list of latitudinal and longitudinal coordinates that just happen to match with the locations of a lot of sacred sites all around the world, everything from the Great Pyramids at Giza through to the Nazca lines in Peru, and a number of other sites. But origin year 8100 made him think maybe this isn't extraterrestrial, maybe it's
future human
time travelers. And then something really interesting happened. I didn't really.
It's all pretty interesting so
well,
far.
yeah, but there wasn't really anything you could hang your hat on. And then I found out that when I was looking into this, I found out that there are very few professors doing theoretical work on time travel. But there is one called Ronald Mallett. And Ronald Mallett was saying, well, is there any way that time travel could work, but without violating any of the laws of physics? And he said, one thing that you might be able to do would be to send a message back through time. And he said the way that you would do this is that he said some subatomic particles have a spin state that is kind of either up or down. And he said if you therefore send a stream of particles back into the past, but control their spin state so that they are either up or down, if you can control that, you can create a binary message. Now, Jim didn't even know what binary code was, let alone, or had no experience of it. Didn't know that it was ones and zeros, and that's how you, and of course, none of these people had heard of Ronald Mallet. And yet here was Ronald Mallet postulating that you might send a message back in time using binary code. And, that's that aspect of the Rendlesham story. And when I was doing this for the Ministry of Defence, when I was doing lots of jobs at the Ministry of Defence, your training is always look for connections. And here you have what sounds like a crazy story. You marry it up with what this theoretical physicist is doing, and suddenly maybe it doesn't explain it, but it contextualizes it, I think. And you just maybe have a little in that you didn't have before into what this might be about.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's almost too good to be true. It's like a sort of, paranormal investigator's bucket list. It's maybe, and when something's too obvious, I always think maybe it's just an attention getter. So if I was sending a message back into the past, I would have something that gets your attention, but I would encode something much deeper in. So I don't know. Maybe someone somewhere is running all this through a supercomputer. Maybe AI will be brought to bear on this challenge.
Sure.
What the Rendlesham code is.
Right.
If it's a message. There, yes.
Has it been verified? Has the translation of it been verified by other sources?
Well, you can take now. I think there are websites which will just convert if you write sort of hello, my name is Matt.
Yeah.
You can convert that into binary, and there are websites that will do it for you, and it will spit it out in a series of ones and zeros. And yeah, somebody absolutely has run the ones and zeros from Jim's notebook.
Okay. And it is what it's.
And that's kind of what they get.
So let's walk through it. Exploration of humanity, check. Continuous for planetary advan. What does that mean?
Yeah, it means that the letters don't. The translation doesn't quite work, but it is the nearest approximation. There might be a missing letter.
Okay.
And that even might just be Jim's handwriting, or even if he was under a compulsion, maybe his memory, maybe a transcription error. So this is Nick Sisk's work, the computer scientist that I was mentioning. So, like you say, there are words in there. You can pick out the message, but and then those are the coordinates down below.
And that's where that's where the Great Pyramid is in one of those coordinates. And
yeah.
But the origin year. So why would they start with Jesus? 8100 as an origin year could have been 8,100 years prior to 1980 when this event happened, right?
Yes. And here's another interesting thing. If down at the bottom, obviously, you've got origin year 8,100. Up at the top, you've actually got something very disturbing. Exploration of humanity. 666, then 8,100 again. Now, the 8,100, you can say that seems to match up with the thing down at the bottom. But 666, wait a minute, that's the number of the beast. Now, from the book of Revelations, and earlier we were talking about a faction largely in the Pentagon, but there are some people in the UK. I came across this attitude in the UK as well. There is a faction that believes that aspects of this phenomenon are demonic. You see something like this, and it gets your attention. And there's something else. I mentioned this, the fact that this isn't lights in the sky. This thing landed.
Right.
One of the things they did, people say, what's the best evidence? And what's the best evidence for this? They went to the landing site afterwards. They went back and they found burn marks. This was a small clearing in the trees. They found burn marks, scorch marks on the ground, on the sides of the trees facing the clearing. But they also took out a Geiger counter. And they took some readings. And the readings were, again, none of this is disputed.
Is that radiation?
Radiation readings, yeah. This is in a declassified Ministry of Defense file. So you can go to the National Archives, both either in person or online. You can download this file. It's not just me telling you this story. I mean, this is in the declassified file. The Defense Intelligence staff at the Ministry of Defense got that report on the radiation levels at the landing site from Colonel Holt, Deputy Base Commander. He was the one who ordered the disaster preparedness officer, Sergeant Munro Nevels, to take the radiation readings. And so that is all in the memo. When I did my cold case review, I kind of, one of the questions I asked is, well, we've got these radiation levels, but I said, I know there's background radiation everywhere. It depends on the geology. And there are some sites where you'll get a higher reading. What are the control readings? What's the average background for that particular site? And actually, they give the average, the normal figure, in the same document from Colonel Holt. And I thought, just as a bit of fun, well, not fun, I thought I'd heard people downplay this and say, oh, it's just background radiation. It wasn't. I heard people over-exaggerate this. I said, well, it's a very simple piece of math. For goodness sake, we have both values in the document, in the government file. At the time, this file was in my office. Now it's at the National Archives. I thought, well, how much higher is the radiation level that they recorded from the background? And the answer is it's 6.66 times higher. And again, wait a minute, that's the number of the beast. So as much as you look, I'm not trying to scare people, but I mentioned a secret too terrible to be told. I've mentioned the faction that thinks this is demonic. But when you come across the 666 like that, both in the Rendlesham Code, but also in just the math. I mean, that's like anyone can do the math. Pi is going to be pi anywhere in the universe. Anyone can run those two figures and they get the same answer. That's kind of disturbing. And staying on the subject of the radiation, this is it's one of the reasons why this is such an important story. Some of now Munro Nevels, disaster preparedness officer, he had with him, of course, one of the dosimeters that you have that will change color if you are exposed to too high a dose of radiation. So scientists that work with nuclear materials will routinely wear these sorts of things, and if they turn red, get the hell out of the room. I don't think it was at that level, but it was clearly. My point is, it was not, as some skeptics might say, statistically insignificant. It was significant, and some of the witnesses claim that in later years they experienced adverse health conditions.
I was going to ask that too. Isn't the government isn't the government paying some of these people for injuries that they sustained on encounters with UAPs?
Some of the witnesses went to the VA.
Yeah.
They said, we encountered UAP in 1980 whilst on duty. We would like some help. We want a VA doctor to see us and treat us. In fact, one of the witnesses was kind of, on the patio in my house the day before he went in for heart surgery at the VA facility in Tucson, and he said, "Nick, this might be the last time I see you. It's been fun. I'm glad we got the book out."
Yeah.
It's quite a profound moment. Fortunately, he made it. But the point is, these people, these not just telling the story. And the VA said, "What do you mean, UAP while on duty? That's crazy. UAP don't exist."
Right.
This was before we knew what we know now about ATIP, and because people forget. I think people forget that prior to 2017, if you were a journalist, for example, running a story on this, and you went to the Pentagon and asked a spokesperson for a line, the line would be, "Nobody's interested in this. We haven't had a program. Didn't have anything, after end of 1969 when we closed down Project Blue Book."
Right.
Well, we know that that's not true now. But at the time, when these guys were saying, "Hey, we got some health issue," because of the UAP we encountered at Rendlesham, VA was like, "Get out of here."
Yeah, right.
So now, fortunately, they got hold of a lawyer called Pat Frasconia, who put in hundreds of hours of pro bono work on their behalf, because he was
Convinced
so
they were telling the
passionate
truth.
about this, and convinced, and because it was the right thing to do. They then, in parallel, went to Senator John McCain.
Okay.
And one of Senator McCain's staffers, Cheryl, I've gone a blank on her last name. She was the, in any senator's office, they'll get a whole bunch of inquiries from constituents, and a lot of them will be on the same subject. So Social Security, immigration, VA issues, and each senator will have like one person that does this, one that, and they'll be deep specialists. Cheryl, she looked into this and said, "Well, okay," went to the DOD, the US Air Force. "I want the medical records of these people who claim that they were injured on duty." First of all, they came back and said, "Oh, this guy was not in the Air Force in 1980. And it was like, what?
Yeah.
All his chain of command. Remember, it was like right up to senior level. We served with this guy.
Right.
I've got pictures of myself with this guy.
Yeah.
Then, so they tried that. Well, that's what they said. Then when, no, we're not accepting that. He was there. Then it's like, oh, okay, but you can't have his medical records because part of them are classified. And she's like, Cheryl is like, what do you mean classified? Medical records can obviously are covered by HIPAA in terms of the personal confidentiality, but we have authority from the person concerned.
Right. Right.
We want these medical records.
Yeah.
And she said to me that she had never seen this before in her years of handling VA issues. There was something about these people's medical records. Now then, I came up with a little piece of the puzzle.
Okay.
And I remembered that British intelligence, or the defense intelligence within the Ministry of Defense, had done an intelligence assessment of UAP, not of any individual case, but of the phenomenon as a whole. Just like you might do an intelligence assessment on Russian aircraft production or Chinese aircraft carriers.
Sure.
We'd said, let's do an intelligence assessment on the phenomenon. And the final report has been declassified and released. Large parts of it still withheld. So if you and it's on the Ministry of Defense website.
Okay.
But again, large parts of it still blacked out because it's classified.
Yeah.
But I remembered a line in there that they had released. I was surprised they had released it, but once it's released, like I say, I can discuss things that are either unclassified or declassified. This was a very high classification. This report was secret UK eyes only. That's only one down from top secret. But they released it. And I was, okay, I'm surprised, but if it's out there, I can now legitimately and legally go to the lawyer and go to the staffer and say, hey, people, look at this.
Yeah.
And there it was, in black and white, in this declassified British intelligence assessment. And it said, the well-reported Rendlesham Forest, and I'm paraphrasing, but the well-reported Rendlesham Forest Incident is a case where it might be postulated that witnesses had been exposed to UAP radiation for longer time periods than normal. Bang.
Wow.
Now, the most interesting thing about that is just says UAP radiation.
Yeah.
And most people would be going, is that a thing?
Yeah.
And yes, according to British intelligence, that is a thing. So I said to Pat and to Cheryl, this will help. They then said, hey, to the VA. They went back to the VA and said, hey, these people that first you tried to say they weren't there, then you said that the medical records are classified. Well, take a look at this. Next thing, okay, we'll settle.
Right.
Now, obviously, some of the people involved have gone public about some of this, but others have not. So I'm going to be very, very careful here. And that's why I'm deliberately not naming names.
How many people total were involved?
Again, I'm not going to go there because
Okay.
I just want to be very careful on the side of caution about what has not been publicly disclosed.
Okay.
Firstly, under HIPAA, because while I know who's spoken about it and who hasn't, I just don't want to make a slip and say anything to do with anyone's medical records in terms of conditions and names that they themselves have not put out there.
Sure.
And B, of course, we are right, Matt. We are right on the line here. Remember, I talked about not crossing this line. You and I have walked right up to this line. When I say that this line came from a declassified intelligence assessment, and that I'm surprised it was released, and when I'm talking about we're right on the line here, I think so that's why I'm being careful, because again, the British Official Secrets Act, which is my NDA, is binding for life. The fact that I've left government service is completely irrelevant.
Right.
It's binding for life.
And what are the penalties or consequences of breaking that? Is it just jail time?
It is. You can go to prison for breaking the Official Secrets Act, and people have gone to prison. I don't believe anyone has ever gone to prison for disclosing UAP-related information. But when I look at some of the things going on in the US at the moment, I think some people
they're getting close.
Yeah, they're getting close.
Yeah.
And it makes you wonder. We talked about the Dirty Tricks campaign that elements in the intelligence community used against David Grush. I would not be surprised if at some point they pick one of these whistleblowers and they say, we're going to go after this guy.
Make an example out of him. Yeah.
To discourage the others.
Yeah.
Now, this is where it gets tricky because, of course, whistleblower protections are written into the law.
Right.
And
they're going to get blowback from the general population.
They're getting,
too, about
yes.
that.
And with UAP, of course, you've got a problem. If somebody leaks information to the Chinese government on missile technology, that's very easy. No reasonable person would condone that, and there's no problem going after them, and everyone would understand it. But the moment you go after someone for leaking still classified UAP information, even if the law would allow you to, because whistleblower protections, it's not like a total get out of jail free card. It's you can do some things, but you can't disclose classified information without lawful authority.
Right.
One day they'll come after someone, but the problem that they would have with that is that the moment you came after, as you say, there would be pushback from the public, but also there would be hey, if you're telling us, if Arrow is telling us that there's no evidence, if the official line, notwithstanding everything we've discussed, but if the official line is that this is all just, there's no hard evidence that this is real, if that's not true, I mean, going after someone for leaking classified UAP information might actually confirm that line's not true. So always when you're applying this, they'll be saying 3 questions. Firstly, did the person break the law? Secondly, is there a realistic prospect of securing a conviction? But thirdly, and this is more nebulous, is it in the public interest? And that, I've done this from the inside. When I first came across that and I said, what does that actually mean? A very clever person smiled and said to me, it means anything we want it to mean. So I know we've gone a little off Rendlesham, but it is interesting. And like I say, this whole business of the radioactivity levels, it's in this highly classified document. The VA settled, but right up until they did, it was I don't mean this in a light-hearted way, but it's a little bit of a dance.
Yeah, it's almost as if they would probably rather have those people just disappear than they would like to go through the process of attempting to get them put in jail and then have to worry about why are they getting put in jail and the public scrutiny of it and the blowback and all that stuff. It's was probably easier in the old days when they just made people disappear. But what do you think the radiation? Is that like the engine propulsion? I know this is pure speculation, but any idea what the radiation would be coming from?
It would be speculation. I think I'll flip it around and I'll say, I tell you what I don't think it is. I don't think it's a weapon. I think if it was a weapon, it would probably be more potent. And I know that's anthropocentric, but how can we not be? You know, I think the injuries, and this kind of segues us, and it's not an area of my expertise, but it segues us into the related issue of Havana syndrome. And some of the issues may be similar, others may be different. But I think it's a byproduct. I don't think it's a deliberate, that whatever is behind UAP has set out to make these people sick. I think it came from people getting too close or staying too long. And yeah, it could be that tells us something about the propulsion system, the energy source, whatever it is, whichever of those, both. But you know, heck, it could be anything. I mean, people say it's one of those anthropocentric questions. People say, why would a UFO need lights? Like thinking they're being clever, like, oh, why would a UFO need lights? Like aircraft have them as anti-collision lights. Well, we don't know what function lights on UAP have. So it's a clever question, but not in the sort of sneering way that the skeptics sometimes mean it. It is a genuinely interesting question if you ask it in the right way, i.e. what the light is clearly being emitted, but from what? Is it a propulsion system? Is it an energy source? Is it a decoration? I mean, we put factual information on the side of things. We're talking about whether we're talking about symbols on a craft or patterns on the side of one of our airplanes. But sometimes we stick things on to decorate something. In of course, there's all sorts of tail art on planes, particularly if you go back to the Second World War, whether it's scantily clad ladies on the tail, or whether it's making the front of the aircraft look like a shark. We do those sorts of things. If we're dealing with an NHI, who knows what they do or what that symbolizes? So, can't not look at it through an anthropocentric lens because we have no other lens, but it's worth some thought, I think.
Is that Rendlesham Forest incident for you, is it 100% no doubt in your mind that this was some type of a non-human or future human? This couldn't have been misidentified. It couldn't have been anything else that could have an earthly explanation to it, I guess, right?
Yeah, I don't think so. I'm as confident as I can be that it has a non-conventional explanation.
And what are the other cases that are up there for you that are in that, you're very close to 100% sure that this case is legitimate and authentic? Is Rendlesham at the top based on the work that you've done with?
Rendlesham is at the top. Regarding British cases, I would think two others are the Cosford Incident and the Calvine Incident. Okay. I was going to say I don't know who names these, but actually I do. The Cosford Incident I kind of named because that was in the middle of my posting. Calvine is a case with a good photo. Cosford, we don't have photos, but we have a declassified file with over 100 documents in it.
That one's less known about, right?
Yeah, very, very few people have heard about that. This subject, I feel, is still very US-centric.
Right.
The British government, I mean, actually, they terminated their UFO program at the end of 2009. Although there are some rumors that either it continued but ceased to become public facing.
Okay.
And there's another related rumor that it was effectively taken over by the US government and maybe run through a private contractor to take it further outside the scope of the Freedom of Information Act, to make parliamentary and congressional oversight more difficult, that sort of thing.
Well, the Calvine one is one I think that people know about, and at least if they're familiar with you and your work, they've seen the picture and the image of it. But this other one is there's Calvine.
Okay, let's do this one first. This is Calvine, yes. And there's 3 images. This is an image that came out recently. Ufologists have been following a trail of breadcrumbs for nearly 30 years, and I think I threw the first crumb because I wrote a book way back in 1996 called Open Skies, Closed Minds about some of the Ministry of Defense files and cases. And now we've declassified, and again, for people saying, oh, how come he can talk about this? The Ministry of Defense has declassified and released over 60,000 pages of documents on UAP, quite a lot of which I wrote. And this was a case I first wrote about in 1996. And I didn't say very much about it at the time because I wasn't, again, I wanted not to cross that line. But I said, we have a very interesting case. August 1990, 2 people out one evening, twilight in Scotland. They saw a diamond-shaped craft with a military jet either, circling around the area, either trying to intercept it or maybe escorting it. This object was virtually stationary and then moved off slowly at first and then very rapidly, but moved off vertically. And I said, this took place about a year before I joined. So my predecessor did the investigation, but I, as I kind of joke, inherited the fallout of this. And ufologists had followed this trail and been trying to get hold of this picture for decades. And previously, there are 3 images. So what you're looking at here, this is an image which recently a retired Royal Air Force press officer called Craig Lindsay came forward with this photo. And he's given it, for example, to James Fox, a documentary filmmaker who's made a number of
great
movies
films
on this. Yeah, great films. His latest one called The Program. And this story features here. And Craig Lindsay is the guy who came forward with this picture. And he said, this is one of 6 pictures. And the story that I told back in 1996 was that we had 6 pictures and the associated negatives. We looked at them. Our intelligence community imagery analysts looked at them. They said, this object is real. It's pretty big, maybe 75 feet across. It's not a hoax. And yeah, we want to know what it is in terms of it's one of the things. You get something like this and you say, well, it doesn't seem to have any obvious means of propulsion. Where are the wings? Where's the tail? Where's the all the different parts? And if it doesn't utilize that, how's it staying up there? What's the propulsion system? And if we can figure that out, can we maybe replicate it and achieve some sort of quantum leap breakthrough? But it goes back to the point, just actually to finish off something you asked about Rendlesham, and could it be conventional? Your question with all of this is always, look, I know There are, of course, secret prototype aircraft, missiles, and drones.
Sure.
At any time, we're test flying things that you won't see for 5, 10, 15 years, whatever it is. But Rendlesham Forest is now over 40 years in the past.
Right.
If this was our tech or an adversary's tech, where is that tech? Why haven't we seen that now?
We'll see that one 8,100 years.
Yeah. So Craig Lindsay said this is one of 6 photos, and the story was that we'd gotten all that material from a newspaper. Originally, the witnesses went to a British newspaper, and they said, "Hey, we've got the UFO story of the century." The newspaper came to us at the Ministry of Defence and said, "We're going to run this story. We need a line from you on UFOs more generally, but specifically this case." Somebody at the Ministry of Defence, again, not guilty, it was before my time, had obviously said, "Well, if you want a line, we'll need the photos and we'll need the negatives." Big mistake. They never got them back.
Right.
And the newspaper never ran a story. And the witnesses have never come forward again.
Wow.
Now, people have read all sorts of things into that. There have been stories that they received a visit from the men in black, shall we say, and that conversations were had suggesting it would be wise not to talk about this. I'm being euphemistic here, of course. And so ufologists had been chasing this for years. Craig Lindsay comes out with this photo. James Fox puts it in the program. My line on this, just so that I don't cross the line, I have not commented on whether this is one of the original 6 pictures. The reason I haven't commented is that the Ministry of Defence has not commented.
Okay.
So that's a picture that's doing the rounds. We've got 2 other pictures. A few years ago, I worked on a TV program, and I had said that for years we had, obviously I'd seen this image in the files. I'd been to classified intelligence briefings about this. And the Ministry of Defence, then when it declassified and released the file, I was saying to people, well, when they release that file, then they will release the 6 images, and then I can really talk about it. But I'm not going to prevent my crossing the line. I am not going to cross. I'm not going to preempt them.
Yeah.
So I said, what I can do, and this is right on the line, I said, what I can do is from my memory, and from actually, if we can go to the third, that, when they declassified that particular file, this was in it. And it looks like some sort of cartoon image or a kid's drawing or something. It is actually a photocopy of a line drawing of one of the 6 photos. And in intelligence community imagery analysis, I won't go into the precise details or reasons because I think that's classified, but there are reasons that you do line drawings. It's part of that particular intelligence work. So that was in the declassified file. So when that was in the declassified file, I thought, okay, I've been asked by a TV company who are doing a documentary on this to say, well, can't we do a little bit better than that? Nick, you saw those 6 images. They must be burned into your memory. Using that as a prompt, can you recreate what the image or one of the 6 images actually looked like? So I sat down with a very skilled graphic artist in Los Angeles for a couple of days, and we came up with that. Now, if you flick back between those 2 images, I don't think that's bad.
No.
And then
missing the fence.
So then Craig Lindsay comes out with that. So if you can now maybe flick between that and the CGI one, if you look at that, if people yeah, great, good. Bear in mind that I had not seen the actual photo for 25 years, whatever it was. If you go from my CGI recreation, top left, to the Craig Lindsay photo, it's, if people believe the Craig Lindsay photo is the real deal, then, though I say so myself, that my memory's not bad.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's fantastic.
But look, whichever way you view this, that this is a fascinating case.
Yep.
Now, I have to say, the skeptical theory on this one is that this might be a case where we are talking classified aerospace tech, and there's a big clue in the date of the incident. The date of the incident is August the 4th, 1990, and students of history will instantly remember that that was 2 days after Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. And what was happening at that time? Almost every single special forces unit in the United States and the United Kingdom was thinking, well, we're going to be deployed, I'm sure. So even ahead of our political masters making that decision, let's get ready. Let's anticipate the call, dust off our shiny new toys, and get ready to go. So I'm not saying that as a definitive explanation, but I'm throwing that into the conversation for people to think about.
Right.
And it shows that, as always, there is a very fine line between discussions about this sort of thing and discussions about secret prototype aircraft. This one, when you ask me which way I incline,
Yeah.
on this one, I would incline conventional, but us. Yeah. Rendlesham, I would probably incline the other way.
Right.
And particularly, Rendlesham is now, this year, what are we? Yeah, 1980. So we're what, 45 years in the past. You have an aircraft. It's like stealth. People saw the stealth aircraft in, occasionally a pilot would see a stealth aircraft.
Yeah. This is 1990 though.
The stealth fighter, the F-117, that was publicly declared, I think, 1988, 89, maybe. The Panama operation, perhaps that was.
But do you think that we had that type of technology to be able to have a craft that's 75 feet in diameter, or not in diameter, but yeah, in diameter, I guess, and to have that be able to just float up there like that in 1990?
Possibly.
Yeah.
I mentioned the Ministry of Defense was the family firm. My father, before he was Deputy Chief Scientific Advisor, he was the director at the Royal Aeronautical Establishment at Farnborough. And they had, for example, the largest at the time wind tunnel anywhere in the world. He worked on special projects, on aerodynamics, propulsion systems, aviation historians. When you say how old is stealth technology,
yeah,
people kind of think when they see pictures of an F-117 stealth fighter or a B-2 stealth bomber, this is 80s technology. Sure, if a pilot saw something like that, it would probably be in the 70s. And you could say, yeah, saw it in the 70s, and by the 80s, it was out there.
Right.
The problem with the skeptical theory with all these cases is the question, well, if that was ours, where is it now? Why aren't I seeing this at the Farnborough Air Show or the Paris Air Show or something like that? I mean, stealth technology, most people have no idea that I think I can say this, the roots of that really go back to research that was being done at the tail end of the Second World War. I mean, people were looking at ways to make things invisible to radar almost as soon as radar itself had been developed. I mean, of course they were. In terms of what was actually developed, again, it took time, but if anyone thinks that stealth is 80s technology, try going back a lot further than that. Right. And so, yeah, the question always becomes, is it ours or theirs? And yeah, it's a good question. I don't always have the answer.
Sure. Yeah. And it's speculation either way. But so just a quick sidebar question then. You're familiar with the National Security Act of 1947? And I always bring this up in UFO conversations, and most of the time people don't realize that the National Security Act was enacted within 5 weeks after the Roswell incident. And now national security is what everybody always brings up as reasons for their inability to be able to discuss anything related to the UFO phenomenon. And so was this National Security Act created back then, just weeks after Roswell happened, that incident? Was it created to compartmentalize and keep secret this phenomenon?
The simple answer to that is I don't know.
Okay.
Had I been doing this job for the US government, I would probably know the answer to that question, but I wasn't, so I don't.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. I was just curious, but let's bounce back now. You said that there was a third incident.
Yes, there was one called the Cosford Incident. This one I handled in.
I mean, there were 600 incidents,
but
there was another one.
So
that
I'm
was
just here's another one. Yeah, no, I obviously a lot of them are, without wanting to make it sound arrogant, when I joined that section, most cases looked different. When I left, a lot of them looked kind of the same.
Okay.
And a lot of them, frankly, were low level, not particularly exciting. We didn't necessarily always have good data. There's only so much you can do with a lot of the cases. Sometimes literally you'll get someone reporting something years after the event. There's nothing you can do then. It's like a police case. The first 48 is critical.
Yeah.
And it's critical with UFO investigations, just like it's critical with cops, because the trail goes cold.
Right.
People's memories fade, evidence is lost, etc. Radar tapes, for example, get reused. At the time, it sounds very low tech now, but when I was doing this job in the 90s, radar data was downloaded onto VHS video cassette, and then at the end of the month, you would just, instead of having to keep buying new tapes, you would just record over the old one. So if you had a question, like, we've got a good UFO sighting, was anything tracked on radar that night? Let's have a look at the tapes. If someone came to you more than a month after a sighting, it would be, I can't answer that question.
Right. Sure.
I handled hundreds of cases, but we're just picking on a handful, A, because of time constraints in our interview, but B, obviously, there's no point my telling you about a case where it turned out to be an aircraft.
Right. Yeah. The third most interesting or most powerful case that you worked on, what?
Cosford, yes.
Yeah.
This was late on March 31st. No, pardon me. Yes, there we are. That is actually that I wrote that. Remember, I said that this is I was mentioning that the Ministry of Defence had declassified and released many of its files on UAP. I wrote that. So when it says at the top, head of SEC-AS, that is the head of my division. I am writing this to summarize my investigation. That document concludes, this was me being a little subversive. At the time, our public line on this, because we had to downplay this with Parliament, the media, the public. Our public line, we had a little sound bite that we used. We said UFOs are of no defense significance. Again, it was one of those things where you are, if you ask what does that mean, again, the answer is it means what we want it to mean. Anything you like. It means we try to get people off our backs. Our line was, this is of no defense significance, which kind of sometimes was expressed as there's no threat or there's no evidence of overt hostility. It's kind of a debate you can have. There's actually an equation to define threat. Threat is defined as capability times intent. Well, we applied that to UAP. And we said capability looks pretty darned impressive. Intent, we have no idea because we don't know, stealing Lou Elizondo's phrase, we don't know who's behind the wheel. So that's X, unknown. If you have an unknown in your equation and just the two factors, you can't define, you can't say whether or not there's a threat. But our public line was kind of that there isn't, which I think was a little misleading, to say the least. But going back to Cosford, the document ended with a quote that was subversive because it flipped the narrative of our public line. I finished with a sentence that read, in summary, there seems to be some evidence that on the night in question, a craft of unknown origin was operating over the UK, and that this is therefore in and of itself of defense significance. So what I was kind of carefully doing was deconstructing our public line for my head of division. And my head of division basically said, I concur, and briefed it up his chain of command. Anyway, to tell very briefly the story of the incident itself, there are some similarities with maybe an American case like the Phoenix Lights. Cosford Incident took place over a series of about 6 hours, late on March 30th, in the early hours of March 31st, 1993. Dozens of witnesses, if not hundreds. Most people, of course, at the time didn't come forward at all because of fear of the stigma of speaking out, fear of not being believed, fear of the ridicule, whatever it is. A lot of those witnesses were police officers and military personnel because a lot of this happened in the early hours of the morning. One of the earlier witnesses was leading a troop of scouts, I think, on an evening hike, and they all saw something which he described as like two Concorde aircraft kind of joined together. A lot of people saw something, again, triangular shaped, diamond shaped. One military cadet was walking home. He heard something. At first he thought it was a motorcycle. then he thought, but the sound seems to be coming from the sky. He looked up, didn't see anything except the stars. And then one by one, the stars disappeared. And he thought, well, I guess it's low cloud. And then he looked in disbelief and realized it wasn't low cloud, that a huge triangular craft the size of a football field or bigger was directly overhead and was blocking out the light from the stars. This thing was often heard emitting a low-frequency humming sound that some witnesses who got quite close said was quite unpleasant. You could feel it reverberate through your body. Again, like the radiation. I don't think this is deliberate. I think this is a byproduct, a side effect of something, maybe propulsion system, maybe something else.
Do you lean towards human or non-human for this one?
Well,
with the sound, I just curious.
I lean towards this not being ours.
Okay.
And here's why. One of the military witnesses who probably got closer than almost anyone else, maybe not as close as the military cadet that I was mentioning with the stars blacking out one by one, but this particular military officer, because this craft flew directly over 2 Air Force bases.
Okay.
This particular military officer, who also was the last person, in chronological order, he was the last person to see it. I mentioned these sightings took place over a series of 6 hours. His sighting at 2:40 in the morning was the last one on our file.
Okay.
He said, and he was a meteorological officer, so his job is to look at things in the sky,
right,
usually cloud formations, and to make assessments of heights and things and all of that. And of course, he's deployed to all sorts of different bases over the years. He's sometimes fast jet bases, sometimes helicopter bases. He sees this thing coming towards him slowly, maybe 30 or 40 miles an hour, low frequency humming sound. He first sees it through his office window. Then he goes outside. He's looking just in disbelief, just frozen to the spot, looking. 30 or 40 miles an hour, this thing comes towards him. It emits a beam of light, narrow beam of light, that hits the ground and tracks backwards and forwards, almost as if it was searching for something. I didn't talk about this when we were discussing Rendlesham, but Colonel Holt described a similar thing. When he went out, I mentioned Rendlesham, on the first night the thing landed, John Burroughs, Jim Peniston got up close and personal. The second night there were other witnesses. The third night it came back and Colonel Holt saw it. Didn't land again. That was just first night. But on that third night, where Colonel Holt and a team of 6 people were in the forest, having been told that it had come back, he saw a narrow beam of light fire down at the ground in front of him. And he, in later years, when asked about this, he said, I was asking myself, was this a weapon? Was this a warning? Was this communication? And so that happened in Rendlesham. And Colonel Holt, deputy base commander, these are, he was at the time, I think, the highest ranking military officer to have reported seeing a UAP whilst on duty and made an official report. Cosford, this meteorological officer, sees a very similar thing, only he sees something else weird. Normally a light comes on and then it switches off. It might get dimmer or brighter, but it's either on or off. He said that the light fired down at the ground, tracked backwards as if it was looking for something, but then the beam retracted. Maybe I'm not sure if I'm kind of describing this. It's like the speed of light, which is obviously 186,000 miles a second. So as you would witness it, it's instantaneous. It's like the speed of light was slowed down at an impossible order of magnitude, so that the light almost retracted back slowly up the beam, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does.
Once it had completely retracted, and this thing was virtually stationary at that point, it then accelerated away to the horizon in an instant. And when I interviewed him, just probably, he called in, I interviewed him over the phone probably no more than 6 hours after the event. I probably spoke to him 8 or 9 in the morning. His voice was still shaking with emotion, and he said, "Nick, I've been in the Air Force 8 years. I have never seen or experienced anything like that in my life." And so, you know, you have a story like that, 1993, and you're like, okay, if we could do that, and if you believe that aerospace tech runs, you know, let's say 10, 15 years ahead of what's publicly declared, where is that?
Yeah.
Now, where's that technology? And here's another thing, no sonic boom.
Right.
And that's something Lou Elizondo put into the conversation, where he coined the phrase, or popularized, I don't know whether he invented it, but he talked about the 5 observables of UAP, things that, you know, to be UAP as viewed by government, something needs to be both unidentified and anomalous. You know, lots of things can be unidentified.
Sure.
I mean, you can see a light in the sky, and it might be unidentified. And so in strictness, it's a UAP. But if you're talking about the core phenomenon, it's got to be both unidentified and anomalous. It's got to do something unusual, not just be something that you can't tell what it is. So accelerating from a virtual hover, or very slow speed, to multiple times the speed of sound with no sonic boom is anomalous. Therefore, it's one of these so-called 5 observables. Transmedium travel, the ability to move seamlessly from the air to the water, as some UAP do, is another one.
Right.
These are things. So this happened with Cosford.
Okay.
We nearly caused a diplomatic incident on this, because I mentioned the fine line between, are we talking about true UAP from somewhere else, or are we talking about classified aerospace tech? So, of course, part of any investigation, part of my investigation with Cosford, part of what was going on with Calvine, is we ask the Americans, hey, guys, is this your tech? And if so, why don't we know about it, and can we have some? So we can build our own. Because these things make our fast jets look like kids' toys. And the answer came back from the United States government, no, not us. Interestingly, they then asked us, you know, we've been having some reports. Have you Brits got any kind of triangular or diamond-shaped thing that can... Now, maybe that was a clever double bluff, but we didn't think so. But the Secretary of the Air Force at the time, Don Rice, he told Congress there was a rumor that there was a secret hypersonic prototype aircraft, a replacement for the SR-71 Blackbird. And there was a rumor that it was codenamed Aurora, and there was a rumor that it was being test flown, obviously at Area 51, but also in the UK, that they were flying it transatlantic see how it worked on long-distance flights, but transatlantic, so it could fly over the ocean without people seeing it, and that it would land at RAF Machrihanish in Scotland, not far from, if traveling at hypersonic speeds. This is an artist's impression based on some sightings and speculations. And so there was this rumor, and Don Rice said, no, there's no aurora. This is a rumor. And we asked, in relation to Calvine and in relation to Cosford, of course, we were saying, look, is this your tech? Because there's a document, I joke about it, but there's a document in the declassified files from our intelligence people. Actually, it's one of my colleagues writing to me about setting up this intelligence assessment that I mentioned earlier, in the intelligence assessment that we did of the phenomenon. When we were planning this, I'd moved on by the time it was started, so I didn't write it or take part in it. But there was a line when we were talking about setting it up. What was the justification? The justification was, it said we could use this technology if it exists. Right. And of course we wanted the tech. Didn't matter to us whether it was American or alien or whatever it was. But clearly, as I mentioned, it made our fast jets look like kids' toys. And we knew because some of our pilots had chased these things. Now, turns out, of course, we know from people like Ryan Graves and Anne Dietrich and some others, we know that Americans had been chasing these things themselves. Some of the speeds, maneuvers, and accelerations that they report, just staggering. I mean, you can say next generation, but come on. Like some of this is it's not just a faster, more maneuverable aircraft. This is something so above and beyond that it changes the way you incline. Well, the diplomatic incident that we caused was when we asked the Americans in relation to Cosford and Calvine, hey, guys, is this yours? They said no. And then they told Congress, no, we don't have an aurora either. And then someone in British intelligence, because they just couldn't face the idea that this might be extraterrestrial, NHI, or whatever, they're like, I can't intellectually go down that road, so it must be the Americans, made the mistake of asking again, implying that they didn't believe the assurances that had been given. And the message was relayed back to us that Donald Rice was, I think the quote was, incandescent with rage at the suggestion he had misled Congress. And it was like, this is, you get yourself in big trouble with this. But I remember, of course we asked, with all of this, you ask yourself, is it aerospace tech? And if it is it our own? Yeah. Well, you can have a high security clearance and the need to know, but nobody is read into every program. So is it our own? Is it an ally? Or is it an adversary? And I remember going to an intelligence briefing one time on, if you go back, if we can go back to the Calvine pictures again, but those somebody pulled out that picture, and they said, again, one or more of the 6 originals was pulled out, and the intelligence officer leading the briefing said, take that picture, for example. He said, look at that. He said, that's not ours. We know We know that's not ours, i.e. British. And then he started gesticulating. Intelligence officers don't often get animated or excited. And he was a very quiet man, a very thoughtful man.
Okay.
I'd hardly ever heard him raise his voice, but he did on this occasion.
Okay.
He said, "See that?" He said, because my boss was pushing back a bit, being a little bit skeptical about this intelligence assessment. He said, "See that photo?" He said, and he started pointing. He pointed over to one side. And he said, it's not the Americans. And he flipped over the other side. He pointed the other way. And he said, it's not the Russians. And he said, and that only leaves one possibility.
Right.
And he pointed straight up. And me and my boss, we looked at him and looked at his finger. We looked up at the ceiling, you know, it's like almost comedy. You can't help. And then we looked back at him and we looked at each other.
Yeah.
And nothing further was said, because this is, it's like a dance, a little intellectual dance. Nobody in the system will come out and say things like alien,
Right.
or extraterrestrial.
Right. We need a new term for alien. You need to rebrand alien.
Yeah, well, I guess now we have NHI, non-human intelligence.
Right, that's
but
true.
Here's what this intelligence officer said.
Okay.
He just used the phrase, "these people." And he said, "These people, they operate these craft, they run rings around the cutting edge of our tech. We don't know what these people are. We don't know what these people want. We don't know what..." And, you know, when my boss and I were walking back, again, my boss, he was more skeptical than me. Mm-hmm. And he said to me, "Interesting briefing, Nick." And I said, "Yeah, boss."
Yeah.
And he said, "But Nick," he said, "there's one thing troubling me." I said, "Yeah, what's that, boss?" And he said, "Well, all through the briefing, he kept talking about these people." And he stopped, and we were literally walking down the street in Whitehall. And he stopped me, and he stared at me, and he said, "Who are these people?" And I said, "Boss, that's the question, isn't it?"
Right.
And that's kind of how it is in government sometimes. You dance, you go up to the line, but you can't quite bring yourself to go over it somehow. It's like a love that dare not speak its name.
Right.
And that's UAP.
Yeah, it's a stigma, right?
It dared not speak its name.
Yeah.
Although now that's changing. We do now speak its name, and currently its name is NHI.
Right.
But whether we will actually get a different name, a better name, a more accurate name, and more importantly, an explanation of why that name, that I don't know. But the way things are going, the rate of events, the way things are unfolding, if we'd been doing this interview just a week ago, we wouldn't have been talking about one of these whistleblowers and one of these videos, the egg. If we're doing this interview a week time, I guarantee something else will have dropped. It's moving that quickly.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot happening. What do you see as coming next? Like what's on the horizon for the either the phenomenon or disclosure, or what's 2025 going to be like?
I sometimes say to people, I don't know what's coming in all the details, but I think it's something where I would give people some advice. And that advice would be buckle up, because we're going on one heck of a ride. And I think we'll see more whistleblowers. We'll see more videos and photos. We will have more congressional engagement. We have yet to see what Trump's second term will deliver for this subject, but some promises have been made and some hints have been dropped. So we will see. But what I also say to people, and this is just based on more general life advice, is expect the unexpected. Expect the things that come suddenly and unexpectedly from left field and upend everything. And that's where I think we might be going. Expect a few surprises. Expect some more dirty tricks. Like I say, at some point, I think they will go after one of these whistleblowers through the criminal justice system. Like, we will wake up and find that one of the names that we know has been arrested. On another occasion, I wouldn't surprise. Well, here's a dirty trick. You put someone up who kind of is doing a job for you. He does have a background, but their job is to go out and put out a story. I discussed earlier changing an element to mask the identity of a source in the system. That's a tactic. A dirty trick would be to put someone up to come out with a story which is completely fabricated. They do it to draw in Congress, to draw in the mainstream media. They support this story. 3 months later, it turns out they say this person is a complete imposter. Sure. Now, actually, they're an asset or they're just doing a job, whatever it is. But expect one of the flagship cases or whistleblowers to be completely discredited, but then ask yourself, is that actually part of the plan?
Was he a plant in the first place?
Yeah.
Right.
So that might happen at some point.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, well, that was a very deep dive into the UAP phenomenon. Super appreciate it. You've got a documentary coming out.
I do, and it's on a subject that a lot of people might not expect from me. People hear, oh, Nick Pope's got a new film. I have written some films before. I do a lot of TV. So I'm on a lot of shows like Ancient Aliens and History's Greatest Mysteries, those sorts of things. But obviously, they're great shows, but you do an interview and they just use some parts of that interview, and there are other contributors, and then there's a narrator, and they tell a story, but it's not necessarily your story. It's commenting on other things. So occasionally I like to step out of that world and write my own material. So, for example, when the New York Times first ran the story about ATIP and the US Navy videos and everything that went with that, I thought I'd like to have a go at telling that story.
Yep.
And I wrote a film called Aliens at the Pentagon. And then I wrote a film, I said I created a series on societal impact of disclosure. I also made a film called Indistinguishable from Magic, speculating about things like UAP technologies and what they might bring. And that was a derivation of the classic Arthur C. Clarke quote that any sufficiently advanced technology will be indistinguishable from magic. Right. And so everyone is probably thinking to themselves, Nick Pope's got a new film. Oh, yeah, I've seen some of his other ones. It's obviously about UAP. Yeah. It's not about UAP. It is about COVID. Or specifically, it is about the official response to COVID, which I believe was majorly mishandled. I believe that we were operating on a false narrative, or rather a misleading narrative, that everyone's at risk, when the data very quickly and very clearly showed that everyone was not at risk. Only a very small group of people were at risk of serious health outcome, and that was the elderly, the immunocompromised, and the obese, and often people who fell into two, or actually often all three of those categories. So a smart strategy might have been to adapt your healthcare measures to those very specific groups of people at genuine risk. Right. So, and yet that's not what we did. Worse, we bet the farm on a handful of measures, lockdowns, masks, vaccines, and school closures, which turned out to be
business closures.
Business closures as well. Closures across the board that turned out to be the most divisive, as not to mention expensive. I mean, people, as you know better than I, lost their livelihoods, their businesses, their jobs, whatever. So expensive, huge cost.
And still feeling the effects of it today through inflation and stagflation and high interest rates. It's all because of the policies that happened after from the way that we handled COVID.
Absolutely. And things that are in the news a lot, like the staggeringly low rate of federal employees who were actually working from their offices, is largely a legacy of COVID. My wife is a professor emeritus, but when she was at her university before retirement, she was saying, we have still not returned to anything like pre-COVID normality. A lot of things are still done online, when so much of the learning experience comes from genuine face-to-face human contact and interaction that you just don't get on a Zoom call. So those measures that were instigated were expensive, both in terms of the consequences that we're still seeing now, both, financially, obviously hugely expensive. It cost literally trillions of dollars. Also expensive in terms of human rights. I mean, I think this set human rights back a generation. And yet the data now showed, maybe not at the absolute outset, as the data did show who was at risk, but the data fairly quickly showed that, pretty much as soon as we had the vaccine, and I think Operation Warp Speed Drive actually was one of the few success stories of the pandemic. And even though I know there are a lot of vaccine skeptics out there, I mean, I think if you're genuinely at risk, I think it's well worth taking the vaccine to leverage the odds. But if you're not, if like most people, you're really only at risk of catching something with flu or cold-like symptoms, why mandate those people the moment you find out that vaccine doesn't stop transmission? So whether it was mandates or indeed, the cloth masks that everyone was mandated to use, again, we now know from the Cochrane meta-analysis, we know from the Danish mask study, we know from the British government study that the Department of Education did that led to the unmasking of kids in schools, that it really only had a statistically insignificant effect on health outcomes, whether that's lowering mortality rates or whether it's halting community spread. Same with lockdowns. Again, only, and again, there are published studies on all of this showing how not only was it statistically insignificant benefit, but huge financial, civil liberties cost, huge opportunity cost. I mean, what the heck could we have done with those trillions of dollars that were spent? And this is a story that we've really not told. As COVID disappears into the rearview mirror, maybe out of embarrassment or just, God, I don't want to go back there. We've not gone back. We've not done that soul searching and said, look, all the things that we did, all the mandates, vaccines, lockdowns, masks, school and business closures, were hugely expensive, largely didn't work, set civil liberties back a generation, and yet we're all expected to kind of forget about it and move on. Oh, that's all right then. Well, no, it isn't. Firstly, there needs to be accountability, and if anyone made bad decisions, they need to be held to account for them if they were bad faith, and to learn from them if they were good faith but bad decisions.
Sure,
and part
sure.
of every single military operation that is ever done is the lessons learned exercise that comes afterwards. And it's not just so that we can tell the story accurately for history, so that our history is accurate, which is important. Knowledge for the sake of knowledge is important. I'm a passionate believer in that. But it's doubly important because there will be another pandemic.
Right.
And two things with that. First,
why do you think it's so challenging for people? Why do you think it's such a difficult topic? You know, I mean, it's the whole. It's so fresh, I guess. It just happened a few years ago, and so people are obviously it's very difficult to have someone admit that they were wrong. You know, I think that's a part of it.
It's part of it. Human nature. It's hardwired into us.
Yeah.
Part of it is political.
Yeah.
We divided on broadly partisan lines. This is a generalization, but generally speaking, the left came down more on the side of the mandates, the right and libertarians the other way.
Right.
Also, I think, so that's part of it. So there's, again, half the population is going to kind of still believe ideologically, because it became party political, in their masks and their lockdowns and their vaccine mandates, and anyone who challenges that's just you're a right-wing nut job, you're a conspiracy theorist. You know, the phrase, this is one of the big things I talk about in the film, is the censorship, the way in which we were not allowed to have an open and honest conversation during the pandemic. Dissenting voices were censored, deplatformed, shadow banned. Phrases like natural immunity were dishonestly slurred as being right-wing dog whistles. Ideas like lab leak were seen as kind of conspiracy theories. Yeah, and yet, if you go onto the website of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence and read their latest assessment on the origins of COVID, of those 18 parts of the US intelligence community, some parts think that it was zoonotic emergence from animal to human, making the species jump. Others say, no, we believe it was a lab leak. And others say, we don't have enough data to make a firm assessment. And yet, at the time, we were told that lab leak was some right-wing conspiracy theory. And now the official position of the US intelligence community is that some parts of the agency say that's exactly what happened. And so that's one thing. So that was important. The Great Barrington Declaration was a legitimate idea about an alternative solution, that we would target help and resources on those people genuinely at serious risk, and everyone else would be free to lead their lives. that way, so many people would have effectively caught either a cold or nothing at all, particularly after the mutation to mild strains like Omicron, that then it would be far less likely, because that natural immunity would build up in the community, that actually those at risk wouldn't get it. But again, censored. It was dishonestly smeared as let it rip when it was deliberately designed as a compromise. Everyone remembers the phrase, "You're killing grandma. You want to kill grandma." To anyone who dared question the narrative.
Fear, shame, control.
Fear, shame, control. And so that happened. We never had a conversation about obesity because the media was so politically correct in not wanting to fat shame that it kind of lost sight of the fact that if you actually encouraged people to lose weight, it was one of the very few things, given that the vaccine didn't stop transmission, it was one of the very few things that you could do to leverage the odds in your conversation. But we never had this. And this matters. Yeah, it matters because of the next pandemic. It matters because when that and it's when, not if. Firstly, a lot of half the people won't listen to any healthcare advice they get ever again on a pandemic, just because they'll think, fool me once, shame on me, fool me twice, shame on you. And that's a bad thing, because sometimes the health advice is right. And look, I mean, the polio vaccine is one of the great success stories in modern history. If we have a bird flu pandemic, if we get something like the polio vaccine for that, people should be lining up for it. But if healthcare measures like cloth masks and lockdowns don't work, and they didn't work for COVID, then we don't want just to repeat the same mistakes. So my film, Apocalypse COVID, isn't really about COVID. It's about the failed response to COVID. Now, there have been some dramas. Our first distributor pulled out. This is still... And nobody... To go back to your question about why we don't have this conversation. Yeah, part of it is human nature. We don't... I don't want... No one wants to admit that they walked around like with a mask on their face for 2 years, frankly, for nothing.
Right.
Because they feel
right.
darn stupid.
Yeah.
As well they might. And people who mandated that they do that sort of thing should be torn down from any position of authority, not literally, but metaphorically, voted out of office, if they're a public employee, fired. And yet we're not having this conversation. So it's still a touchy subject.
Yep.
There are still people who will kind of condemn this as a conspiracy film. It isn't. Every single fact in this documentary, as I go along, I wrote this out as a 12,000 word script, and then I went into the studio and I narrated it. When I say this study on masks, this scientific paper on lockdowns, every single thing I cite, I give the name of the publication, the date of the publication. It's all cited properly. But yet it was like our first distributor pulled out. There has been some reluctance. Fortunately, Peter Thiel's Hereticon gave the film its world premiere. It is now getting some mainstream media coverage, but there are still people that say, "Oh, this is just some right-wing conspiracy nonsense."
Yeah. So when can people watch it?
Well, it is on Amazon. People can find it there. We're still in the process of getting it onto other streaming platforms. obviously at some stage, I hope that this will get on to television and that this will be shown as a documentary, because my aim in this is to, as when Lou Elizondo came out on UAP, somebody asked him, "What are you trying to do?" He said, I want to help kickstart a conversation that the American people can have about this interesting and important subject. I want my film Apocalypse COVID to kickstart the national and maybe international conversation we should be having about the failed response to COVID, so that our response for the next pandemic is more effective, because that's the real reason why this matters, because that is literally a matter of life and death. But if half the population aren't going to listen to the advice because public trust in healthcare institutions is shattered, or a large part of the population believe that, then we are going to have a very ineffective take-up.
Yeah, for sure. Fascinating, man. I mean, it's good stuff. You're not picking easy ones to get into.
I'm not. If I did, look, there are probably not two more subjects that could get you more criticized than UAP. And bear in mind, having done UAP from the inside, in a lot of people's minds, I'm the bad guy here. I'm the villain. You can go onto the internet and find conspiracy theories that say I'm still secretly working for the government. So, Nick Pope is a shill. Nick Pope is still on the payroll.
I hear that about half of my guests, that they're working for the government.
Yeah. Now, let me tell you who is. No, I'm joking. But so UAP is a difficult subject to do. And COVID is absolutely. It's difficult. But I believe both these subjects are absolutely, they're difficult, but they are both interesting and important.
For sure.
And that's why I'm not going to back down. That's why I'm going to carry on doing what I do. I see my role now as a communicator. My government time is obviously in the past, notwithstanding the conspiracy theories. But I am fortunate enough through my work to have a mainstream news media platform, and I am going to use it. I am going to use it as a communicator, not because I am arrogantly setting myself up as somebody who has all the answers. My goodness, I don't. But I do have some questions, and I think other people should have some questions too about the response to COVID, about UAP. And so I'm going to carry on. Good
for you, man. Good for you. And I mean, it's two of the most important topics that you could be talking about. I mean, for me, UAP is it's huge. It's up there. We deserve to know the truth. We deserve to know what reality we're living in. And COVID, yeah, like you say, I mean, we got to get it right next time. We're currently how we're sitting, just completely divided on the topic and really not ready for something else with a 5% death rate or 10% death rate to come and hit. It's pretty alarming to not really have gotten to a conclusion about how should we be handling these types of pandemics.
Yeah, we need to depoliticize it somehow.
Everything
same with UAP.
Yeah.
I mean, UAP, we don't want that. I talked about how that was bipartisan. We need to
Everything
keep that
is politicized. It's crazy.
Bipartisan, yeah. And we need to somehow depoliticize COVID. And even though it's uncomfortable, and that gets to the heart of it, people don't like uncomfortable situations, but people need to be put into that uncomfortable space. Life isn't about taking on, whether it's me making a film or you tackling a subject on a podcast or in your business life. Life, the easy decisions is not what it's all about. Sometimes the important things are taking the hard decisions, whether those are business decisions or whether they're decisions about subjects to speak out on, to make a documentary about. It's you've got to find the interesting questions, but you've got to find the difficult conversations, and sometimes you've just got to bite the bullet and have those conversations.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. Well, this has been fascinating. Really have enjoyed it tremendously. Do you think we missed anything? Any specific topics?
No. I mean, as is always the case, we'll end the interview and we'll be walking out of the room and I'll be like, oh, shoot, I should have told him about the spaceship that we have or something like that. But no, joking aside, I think that we really covered a lot of fascinating ground, and we went into some areas that I've not gotten into before in other interviews. So I'm very grateful to you for leading this conversation and asking those questions. And it was a two-way process, but I really believe that we hit a lot of points. People like COVID, like UAP. Not everyone will agree, and that's fine. I don't want to police how people think. I mean, I mentioned earlier, I'm very libertarian in my leadings. I don't want to tell people whether it's COVID or UAP, believe this, believe that. But, watch the film and decide for yourself. Look at the UAP information. And I think this interview, this conversation, we have gone to a lot of places. I'm sure people will be watching kind of shaking their fist at the screen or whatever it is and saying, no, I completely disagree. Well, good for them. But let's have that conversation.
Right, exactly. Yeah, we're not going to make progress unless we have the conversation. So, well, good, man. Yeah, how can people follow you?
My website is nickpope.net.
Okay.
And this will really get conspiracy theories that I'm still secretly working for the government. My handle on X, formerly known as Twitter, is at Nick Pope MOD. Okay. The MOD, Ministry of Defense.
Ministry of Defense, sure.
But yeah, at Nick Pope MOD.
Okay.
And I tend to, when a UAP-related story breaks, it's X where I tend to post that. The website is more of a resource for people wanting to do sort of background on my government work on UAP. X is where I kind of tend to put my current thoughts on breaking stories.
That's where I saw the trailer for the COVID apocalypse was on X then from you.
Right.
Yeah. You've got a big following on there?
I have. I think I've got about 120,000 people.
That's a big following.
Something like that.
Yep.
It goes up all the time. I guess if I kind of get to have a conversation with Elon Musk or
shoot up,
President Trump or Joe Rogan, I'll get a few more followers. But
this one is
this
will
big.
put you through the moon.
But at the moment, I'm sitting on about 120,000. Cool. So that's why I try to post, at least something every day, sometimes multiple points, and I try and respond to people when I can. Obviously, with just the sheer volume, you can only scratch the surface with that. But I do genuinely try to interact and reply.
Good. Well, good. Yeah, man. It's I've got something for you here. So it's a little gift that I give to all of my guests. And I also want to thank you for picking up the slack with, I'm sure the audience can tell that I've got a little congestion going on today. So it's, thank you for being very energetic and taking over the podcast today. You did a great job.
Thank you. I hope I didn't talk too much.
No.
Difficult, A, because there's such a lot to discuss, and B, as you can tell, I'm passionate about these subjects because they're interesting and important.
Yep.
Shall I open this on air, or shall I take
anytime
back with me?
Anytime. It's a cup, so it's a Limitless cup. It's a vase, so I've 3D printed some of these vases.
Great.
Yeah, and a book and a gift card.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Very welcome.
Much appreciated.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
No, can't thank you enough for saying yes and for making the time to come down here. That's a big deal because it's still a relatively small podcast, but whatever it was it convinced you to come on. I'm grateful.
Well, I know it will grow and grow because it was your production values and your skills as a podcaster. It looks easy, and I've been on a lot of podcasts, but as you know, it's not easy. But and I turned down for that reason, and for time constraints, most of the requests. But when I got your invitation, I dipped into your interviews, and I thought, hey, this guy knows his
cool
stuff.
Cool.
He's asking some really interesting questions, and he's taking the guests to some, and of course, more importantly, the audience to some really interesting places. So thank you for having me and doing this, and thank you for your hospitality. And like I say, I hope I wasn't talking too much.
Oh, you're perfect. Absolutely great guests and phenomenal conversation. And I would love to have you back sometime. Maybe a year from now, if there's updates and we connect again. Maybe we actually make that dinner happen that the delayed plane flight caused us to miss.
And who knows, maybe if we do it a little down the line, we will be having that post-disclosure societal impact. Right. And your first question will be, well, Nick, now the news about the NHI is out. Yeah. What's changed for you?
Right. Love it. Yeah. Let's hope that our next show that we can be at that point having that conversation. That would be great.
I mean, people, sometimes skeptics kind of, again, trying to be snarky about it, say, oh, these people would hate disclosure because then they'd have nothing to talk about. Firstly, if that was the price, I'd take that.
100%.
But secondly, come on, man. Yeah. I mean, we'd have nothing to talk about. We would have everything. So many things to talk about. The post-disclosure, post-first contact world will be a totally different place. How will that not have lots to discuss?
Right. Exactly. I'm looking forward to it for sure. So, and appreciate you being out there and talking to people and sharing your perspective. It's very logical. It's very, you've got the history, obviously, you've got the experience, but your perspective in general is very logical and smart and articulate, and it's just a breath of fresh air to chat with you and to learn from you about this phenomenon. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Yep. All right, we'll close it out with that.